The security camera captured everything. The single father in janitorial blues slipping his winter coat onto a shivering homeless man. The little girl doing homework at 2 a.m. in an empty break room. The prayers whispered over a mop bucket. When CEO Charlotte Wynn watched the footage, she made one anonymous gesture of kindness and accidentally destroyed his life. Now, with his daughter dying and the world watching, two strangers from opposite worlds must decide. Is compassion worth the cost? Stay with me until the end of this story and comment the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this journey of hope can reach. The Glass Ridge Corporate Center stood like a monument to American ambition. 43 floors of steel and glass piercing the Chicago skyline, its windows reflecting clouds by day and stars by night. During business hours, it pulsed with the energy of 1,000 professionals, lawyers in sharp suits, consultants clutching lattes, executives barking orders into Bluetooth earpieces. But after midnight, when the last ambitious associate finally abandoned their desk and the elevator banks fell silent, the building belonged to a different kind of worker entirely. Jacob Miles pushed his cleaning cart down the 32nd floor hallway, wheels squeaking softly against polished marble. The sound echoed in the emptiness, a lonely rhythm that had become the soundtrack of his life for the past 18 months. He was 36, but looked older, with premature silver threading through his dark hair and permanent shadows beneath his eyes. His janitorial uniform hung loose on a frame that had once been muscular, back when he'd worked the factory floor at Riverside Manufacturing before the plant closed and took 800 jobs with it. "Daddy, I finished my math worksheet." The small voice drifted from the break room at the corridor's end. Jacob smiled despite his exhaustion. That voice was the only thing that made the night shift bearable, made anything bearable, really. "That's my smart girl," he called back, pausing his cart. "Double-check problem 7. You always flip the sign when you divide by a negative." A groan echoed down the hallway. "But I already checked it twice." "Third time's the charm, Hannah Banana." Jacob resumed his work, spraying glass cleaner on a conference room door and wiping in careful circles. Through the transparent walls, he could see the Chicago skyline spreading in all directions, a galaxy of lights that represented everything he used to have and everything he was still fighting for. Somewhere in that sprawl of illumination, his daughter would grow up, would go to college if he could manage it, would live a life bigger than these midnight hours in an empty corporate tower. He caught his reflection in the glass and looked away quickly. That was another man, the one who used to come home to a wife's kiss and a warm dinner, who had a mortgage and a 401k and stupid arguments about whose turn it was to take out the trash. That man had died right alongside Rebecca on a rainy Tuesday morning when a distracted driver ran a red light and erased his entire future in the time it took to scream. Jacob sprayed another section of glass, erasing his ghost. "Mr. Miles, burning the midnight oil, I see." He turned to find Frank Henson, one of the junior associates from the litigation department, emerging from an office with a briefcase in one hand and his suit jacket slung over his shoulder. The young man looked haggard, his expensive tie loosened and his eyes bloodshot. "Evening, Mr. Henson," Jacob said, nodding respectfully. "Long day?" 57 hours since Monday." Frank rubbed his face. "Sometimes I think you've got the right idea. At least you get to go home while the sun's up." Jacob smiled politely, though the comment stung in ways the younger man couldn't imagine. Frank probably made more in a month than Jacob earned in a year, and he definitely didn't spend his mornings grocery shopping at food banks or lying awake calculating whether he could afford both electricity and his daughter's school supplies. "Grass is always greener," Jacob said simply. "You have a good night, sir." "You too." Frank started toward the elevator, then paused. "Hey, I meant to tell you, whatever you did to my office last week, keep doing it. I spilled coffee all over my desk Tuesday night, figured it was ruined. When I came in Wednesday morning, you'd somehow gotten the stain out of the wood. Saved my ass from buying a new desk." Jacob felt a flicker of warmth in his chest. "Just a little vinegar and lemon juice. Old factory trick." "Well, thanks. Seriously." Frank waved and disappeared into the elevator bank. These small moments, they were what kept Jacob going. Not the paycheck, though God knew he needed every dollar. Not even the health insurance that came with full-time employment, though that was worth its weight in gold with a 7-year-old daughter. No, what sustained him through these hollow hours was the knowledge that his work mattered, even if nobody usually noticed. A clean bathroom meant dignity for the woman on the 15th floor going through a divorce. Fixed lighting meant safety for the late-night paralegal walking to her car. Details mattered. Invisible work still mattered. His late wife Rebecca used to say he had the soul of a servant in the best possible way. "You see what needs doing," she'd told him once, running her fingers through his hair after he'd spent a Saturday fixing a neighbor's broken fence. "And you just do it. No fanfare, no credit needed. You're going to change the world one small kindness at a time, Jacob Miles." The memory made his throat tight. He'd give anything, anything, to hear her voice one more time. To ask her what to do about Hannah's growing questions about why Mommy was in heaven, about the medical bills from the accident that still arrived like clockwork 2 years later, drowning him in debt, about the bone-deep exhaustion that made him feel like a ghost haunting his own life. He finished the 32nd floor and wheeled his cart to the elevator, pressing the button for 33. As the car ascended, he checked his watch. 2:47 a.m. He'd need to wake Hannah at 4:30 to get her home, fed, and ready for school by 7:45. Then he'd grab 3 hours of sleep before picking her up at 3 p.m., spending the afternoon helping with homework and pretending he wasn't dead on his feet before heading back here at 10 p.m. to do it all again. It was unsustainable. He knew that. But what choice did he have? The elevator dinged, doors sliding open to reveal the 33rd floor, executive territory. The carpet here was plusher, the art on the walls actual paintings instead of motivational posters. Jacob had cleaned these offices for over a year and still felt like an intruder every time he stepped onto this floor. He was pulling out his trash bags when he heard it, a soft, muffled sound that didn't belong. Jacob froze, listening. There it was again, coming from the emergency stairwell. Every instinct told him to mind his business. This was Chicago. Weird noises at 3 a.m. rarely led anywhere good, but something in the sound, a brokenness, a desperation, pulled at him. Rebecca's voice echoed in his memory. "You see what needs doing, and you just do it." Jacob left his cart and moved quietly toward the stairwell door. He eased it open, the heavy fire door barely making a sound, and peered into the concrete shaft. An old man sat huddled on the landing between floors, wrapped in newspapers and cardboard. He was shivering violently despite the building's heating system, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Something about his bearing, the rigid set of his shoulders despite the trembling, suggested military training. "Sir?" Jacob spoke softly, not wanting to startle him. "Are you okay?" The man's head jerked up, revealing a weathered face mapped with wrinkles and a gray beard that had grown wild. His eyes were sharp and wary. "Didn't mean to cause trouble. I'll move along." "You're not causing trouble." Jacob descended the stairs slowly, hands visible and non-threatening. "Are you cold?" "I'm fine." But the man's teeth chattered, betraying the lie. Jacob shrugged off his jacket, the heavy Carhartt coat that was too big for him now, but had belonged to his father, one of the few possessions with real sentimental value. Chicago in January was brutal, and he'd need the coat for the walk home. But looking at this shivering old man, the choice wasn't really a choice at all. "Here." He held out the jacket. "Please." The man stared at the offering like it might be a trick. "You don't even know me." "Don't need to." Jacob draped the coat over the man's shoulders. "We all need help sometimes." "I was at Normandy." The words burst out suddenly, defensively. "June 6, 1944. I was 19 years old and scared out of my mind, but I went up that beach. I served. I wasn't always—" He gestured vaguely at his current state, eyes wet. Jacob crouched down, meeting the man's gaze. "Thank you for your service, sir. Truly. Whatever brought you here, that's between you and God, and none of my business. But you served our country, so let me serve you tonight, okay?" The old veteran's jaw worked silently. Finally, he pulled the coat tighter around himself. "Name's William Henderson. Jacob Miles." They shook hands. William's grip was surprisingly strong. "There's a shelter 6 blocks south on Wabash, St. Christopher's. My friend Pastor Marcus runs it. You tell him Jacob sent you, they'll get you a hot meal and a bed." "I don't do handouts." "It's not a handout. It's people helping people." Jacob pulled out his wallet, extracting the last $20 bill he had until payday. For the L train to get there. William looked at the money, then at Jacob's threadbare uniform shirt, missing several buttons. "You're giving me your coat and your last 20? I've got a daughter waiting for me down the hall. I've got a job and a roof over my head, even if it's a small one. You need this more than I do tonight." Jacob pressed the bill into William's hand. Sometimes we're blessed to be a blessing, you know? For a long moment, neither man spoke. Then William's weathered face crumpled, and he began to cry, deep, shuddering sobs that seemed to shake loose decades of accumulated pain. Jacob sat beside him on the cold concrete stairs and just waited, one hand on the old soldier's shoulder, letting him purge whatever demons had brought him to this moment. Finally, William wiped his eyes with the coat sleeve. "Thank you," he whispered hoarsely. "You'll never know what this means. Get warm. Get safe." Jacob stood, offering a hand to help William up. "And William? You did serve. You still matter. Don't let anybody tell you different." He made sure the veteran made it safely out of the building, watching through the lobby windows as William shuffled toward the L station in the pre-dawn darkness, Jacob's coat wrapped tightly around him. Then he turned back to the elevator, shirtless now, and already feeling the chill of the air conditioning. He'd figure something out. He always did. 43 floors above the lobby, Charlotte Wynne sat in her private office, watching the security monitor with an expression that hadn't changed in 17 minutes. Stunned disbelief. She'd rewind the footage twice already, watching the janitor, Jacob Miles, according to the employee database, give away his coat to a homeless man in the stairwell. Not a casual donation, but his coat. The one he'd arrived wearing. The one he'd clearly need for the walk home in 20-degree weather. Charlotte tapped a manicured nail against her mahogany desk, a habit that emerged when she was thinking hard. She was 43, elegant in an ice queen sort of way, with silver blonde hair always pulled into a perfect chignon and designer clothes that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Forbes had called her Chicago's most ruthless CEO last year. The Wall Street Journal dubbed her the Guillotine for her efficiency in cutting unprofitable divisions. She'd built Glassridge Financial from a struggling regional firm into a national powerhouse through pure will and strategic brilliance. She was also, according to her ex-husband and most of her board members, emotionally unavailable, pathologically work-focused, and incapable of genuine human connection. But she wasn't heartless. Not really. Just protected. Charlotte zoomed the camera feed in on Jacob's face, the moment when he'd pressed that $20 bill into William's hand. The expression there wasn't martyrdom or self-righteousness. It was simple, unself-conscious kindness. The face of someone who helped because not helping was unthinkable. When was the last time Charlotte had seen that kind of goodness? The answer came immediately. Her father's face. Richard Wynne, who'd worked as a building maintenance supervisor for 37 years before a heart attack took him at 64, he'd died with $7,000 in his bank account and $1 million worth of stories about the people he'd helped. Charlotte had inherited his stubbornness and work ethic, but had deliberately abandoned what she saw as his foolish generosity. Look where kindness had gotten him, an early grave and a retirement plan that barely covered the funeral. No, Charlotte had learned early that sentiment was expensive and success required ruthlessness. But watching Jacob Miles on that security feed, something uncomfortable twisted in her chest, something that felt dangerously close to shame. She closed the security application and tried to focus on the quarterly report spreadsheet glowing on her other monitor. Revenue was up 34%. They'd exceeded projections in 7 of 9 divisions. The board meeting Friday would be a victory lap. Her eyes drifted back to the closed security application. With a frustrated sigh, Charlotte reopened it and switched to the break room camera on the 32nd floor. There, curled up on a worn couch, was a little girl with dark curls and her father's eyes. She'd fallen asleep over her homework, one hand still clutching a pencil, the other wrapped around a stuffed elephant that had clearly seen better days. Charlotte checked the timestamp, 3:22 a.m., a 7-year-old doing homework after 3 in the morning because her father couldn't afford childcare during his night shift. The uncomfortable feeling in Charlotte's chest intensified. She opened the HR database and pulled up Jacob Miles's employee file. The photo showed a man who looked younger, less hollowed out. Hired 18 months ago as a level 2 custodian. Perfect attendance record. No complaints, no incidents. The emergency contact section listed only one name, Hannah Miles. Relationship, daughter. Age 7. Charlotte clicked through to his employment application. Previous experience, 12 years as a factory supervisor at Riverside Manufacturing. Skills, mechanical repair, welding, quality control, equipment maintenance. He'd taken a massive step down to work here, probably because the custodial job came with health insurance. She shouldn't care. She employed 3,400 people across 17 locations. She couldn't know all their stories, couldn't shoulder all their burdens. That's what HR was for. That's what benefit packages were designed to handle. But she did care. Against every instinct she'd carefully cultivated, Charlotte Wynn cared about the man cleaning her building who gave away his coat to strangers and brought his daughter to work because he had no other choice. The realization terrified her. Jacob returned to the break room to find Hannah still asleep on the couch, her homework scattered around her like fallen leaves. He smiled despite his exhaustion and his missing coat, crouching beside her to gently brush curls from her forehead. "Hannah Banana," he whispered. "Wake up, sweetheart. We've got 2 more floors to finish." She stirred, blinking sleepily. "Is it morning?" "Not yet. Just a little more work, then we'll go home." He kissed her forehead. "How's that math looking?" Hannah yawned and grabbed her worksheet. "Problem 7 is still confusing." "Show me." They sat together on the couch, shoulders touching, working through the equation. This was their routine. Homework and stolen moments between cleaning offices, life lessons taught in empty corporate break rooms. It wasn't ideal. It wasn't what Jacob wanted for his daughter. But it was what they had, and he'd learned that gratitude for what you had was better than bitterness about what you'd lost. Ooh. Hannah's face lit up with understanding. "You flipped the sign, because dividing by -3 is like multiplying by -1/3. "There's my genius," Jacob hugged her tight. "You got it." "Daddy?" "Yeah, baby?" "Where's your coat?" Jacob had hoped she wouldn't notice. "I gave it to someone who needed it more." Hannah's dark eyes, so much like her mother's, studied his face. She was too perceptive for 7, too aware of struggle and sacrifice. It made Jacob's heart ache. "Are we going to be okay?" "Always." He made his voice firm, confident. "You and me, we're a team, and our team is unbeatable." "Like the Avengers?" "Better. We're the Miles family. We've got superpowers they don't even have movies about yet." That earned him a giggle. "What's our superpower?" Jacob pretended to think hard. "We can clean an entire floor faster than the Flash. We're smarter than Iron Man." "You're smarter than Iron Man. I just know fractions. And most importantly, we've got the biggest hearts in the universe. That's our real superpower, Hannah. We love bigger than anybody." She hugged him fiercely, her small arms surprisingly strong around his neck. "I love you, Daddy." "Love you more, baby. Love you most." They finished the last 2 floors together, Hannah emptying small trash cans while Jacob tackled the heavier work. He caught her several times pausing to straighten picture frames on walls or pick up stray paper clips from carpets. His daughter, learning his attention to detail, his care for invisible work. Pride and heartbreak warred in his chest. He wanted so much more for her than this. At 5:15 a.m., Jacob locked his cart in the maintenance closet and gathered their things. Hannah was yawning constantly now, her elephant clutched under one arm, her backpack dragging. He scooped her up. She was getting too big for this, but she'd always be his baby, and carried her toward the elevator. As they passed the 33rd floor reception area, he paused. Something was different. There, on the security desk, sat a brown paper bag that definitely hadn't been there before. His name was written on it in elegant handwriting, Jacob Miles. Confused, he set Hannah down and approached the bag. Inside, he found a brand new winter coat, much nicer than the one he'd given away, and a note on expensive cardstock. "Your kindness was witnessed. Please accept this small token of gratitude from someone who believes the world needs more people like you." No signature. No indication of who'd left it. Jacob's hands trembled as he held the coat. It was quality, real wool, perfectly his size, worth at least $200. Someone had watched him help William. Someone had cared enough to replace what he'd sacrificed. "Daddy, Is that a present? Hannah peered into the bag. I think so, sweetie. Who from? Jacob reread the note, his vision blurring slightly. An angel, maybe. He put on the coat, it fit perfectly, and gathered Hannah back into his arms. As the elevator descended toward the lobby and the cold Chicago dawn, Jacob sent up a silent prayer of gratitude. Not just for the coat, though that was overwhelming, but for the reminder that kindness created ripples, that invisible work was seen by somebody, that maybe, just maybe, he and Hannah weren't as alone as he sometimes feared. On the 43rd floor, Charlotte Wynne closed her laptop and allowed herself a rare, genuine smile. She'd left the gift anonymously, of course. Getting involved directly would be inappropriate. He was her employee, technically 6 levels below her in the organizational chart, and besides, Charlotte didn't do personal connections. They were messy, complicated, dangerous. But this one small gesture? This she could allow herself. Charlotte gathered her things and rode the private executive elevator down to the parking garage. Her driver waited beside the Mercedes, but she waved him off. "I'll drive myself today, Michael." "Ma'am?" He looked confused. In 3 years, she'd never once driven herself home. "Just feel like it." She slid behind the wheel and sat there for a moment, engine idling, watching the security camera feed on her phone one last time. There was Jacob Miles, emerging from the lobby with his daughter in his arms and Charlotte's coat wrapped around his shoulders. He was smiling, really smiling, the kind that reached his eyes and transformed his whole face. And he was saying something to the little girl that made her laugh. Charlotte watched until they disappeared around the corner, heading toward whatever bus or train would carry them to whatever modest home they could afford. Then she drove to her Lakeshore Drive penthouse, 4,000 square feet of Italian marble and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake Michigan, and stood in the silence of her empty living room, wondering why success suddenly felt less like victory and more like a very expensive cage. Her phone buzzed with a text from her assistant. Board meeting moved to 8 a.m. Friday. Hendricks wants to discuss Q1 projections. Charlotte deleted the message without responding and walked to her window, watching dawn break over the frozen lake. Somewhere in this city of millions, a single father and his daughter were probably arriving home right now. He'd probably make her breakfast, get her ready for school, then collapse into bed for a few precious hours of sleep before doing it all again. And tomorrow night, she'd watch him on those security feeds again. Not because she needed to monitor employee behavior or company property, but because something in his quiet, unself-conscious goodness had awakened something in her she'd thought dead for years. Hope, maybe. Or hunger. Or the terrifying possibility that there was still time to become someone her father would be proud of. Charlotte pressed her palm against the cold glass and made a decision. She'd find other ways to help Jacob Miles. Quietly. Anonymously. Small gestures that wouldn't cross lines or create complications. What could possibly go wrong with a little anonymous kindness? The answer to that question would come soon enough, delivered by security footage and a supervisor's bitter jealousy, destroying lives in ways Charlotte could never have imagined. But for now, in the soft light of dawn breaking over Chicago, 2 strangers stood at their respective windows, one in a penthouse, one in a tiny apartment across town, both hoping, for different reasons, that tomorrow night might bring another chance to do something good. Neither knew they'd already set in motion events that would challenge everything they believed about kindness, sacrifice, and the true cost of caring in a world that often punished the best parts of humanity. The security cameras kept recording, patient and indifferent, capturing every moment for whatever reckoning was to come. The anonymous coat should have been the end of it, a small kindness witnessed, a small kindness returned. But Charlotte Wynne had spent 20 years building a corporate empire on the principle that you could never do just enough. Excellence demanded excess. Success required going further than necessary. So 3 nights after leaving the coat, she found herself back at her desk at 2 a.m., ostensibly reviewing acquisition proposals, but actually watching the security feeds again. Jacob was on the 28th floor, meticulously cleaning the windows of the corner office that belonged to Gerald Hendricks, the company's chief financial officer and Charlotte's most persistent board rival. She watched Jacob spray and wipe in perfect overlapping circles, his reflection ghosting across the glass alongside the glittering city beyond. Hannah was in her usual spot in the break room, but tonight she wasn't doing homework. She was drawing, tongue poking out in concentration, surrounded by scattered crayons and crumpled false starts. Every few minutes she'd hold up her current attempt, squint critically, then crumple it and start again. Charlotte zoomed the camera in. The drawing appeared to be a family portrait, stick figures holding hands beneath a smiling sun, but there were only two figures. A tall one labeled Daddy and a small one labeled Me. No third person. No mother. The realization hit Charlotte with unexpected force. She'd read the employee file, seen widowed in the marital status field, but somehow it hadn't fully registered until this moment. Jacob Miles was alone in this. Completely alone, raising a 7-year-old daughter while working a night shift that barely kept them afloat. Charlotte's fingers moved before her brain could intervene, pulling up a new browser window and navigating to a prepaid gift card website. She selected a $500 Visa card, enough to maybe catch up on some bills or buy Hannah some new clothes, but not so much that it would seem suspicious or overwhelming. The kind of gift that could genuinely help without creating obligation. She had the card delivered to the office the next day, tucked into an unmarked envelope with a simple note. For Hannah. Because every child deserves a chance to dream. That evening, hands trembling slightly with an emotion she refused to name, Charlotte went down to the maintenance office on the second floor. It was 7 p.m., well before the night shift arrived, and the cramped room was empty. Metal lockers lined one wall, each labeled with an employee name. She found Jacob's easily, locker 47, slightly dented, the kind of detail that suggested a long history of use. The lock was a simple combination type. Charlotte felt briefly ridiculous standing in a janitor's locker room in her $3,000 suit, about to leave an anonymous gift like some kind of corporate Santa Claus. But she thought of Hannah's drawing, those two stick figures alone against the world, and her resolve hardened. She slipped the envelope through the locker's ventilation slits and left quickly, heels clicking against linoleum, already second-guessing the impulse. This was getting complicated. First the coat, now cash. She was crossing lines, getting emotionally involved with an employee she'd never even spoken to. It was exactly the kind of sentimental thinking she'd spent her career avoiding. But it was done now. And maybe, she told herself as the elevator carried her back to the executive floor, maybe this would be the last time. One coat, one gift card, 2 small acts of kindness, and then she'd stop watching the security feeds and return to her regularly scheduled programming of quarterly reports and hostile takeovers. Charlotte Wynne had never been particularly good at lying, even to herself. 3 days passed before Jacob worked up the courage to open the envelope he'd found in his locker. He'd known immediately it wasn't official correspondence. The company put memos in the lockers sometimes, safety updates or schedule changes, but those came in standard manila envelopes with the Glass Ridge logo. This envelope was expensive cream card stock, the kind you saw at weddings. He waited until Hannah was asleep, curled up on the break room couch at 1 a.m. before carefully opening it. The gift card fell into his palm, plastic and possibilities. $500. And that note, with its reference to Hannah and dreams. Jacob's first instinct was to put it back, find whoever had left it, return it with thanks, but no thanks. He'd spent 2 years learning to survive on pride and determination, and accepting charity felt like admitting defeat. But then he thought about the field trip permission slip Hannah had brought home yesterday, the one for the science museum that cost $35 he didn't have. Thought about her winter boots that were getting too small, the way she'd started walking on her tiptoes to make them fit a little longer. Thought about the pediatrician appointment he'd been postponing for 3 months because the $40 copay might as well be $4,000 when you were already drowning. He ran his thumb across the note's elegant handwriting. Because every child deserves a chance to dream. Okay, he whispered to the empty locker room. Okay, thank you. Whoever you are. Jacob tucked the card into his wallet, behind the photo of Rebecca he still carried everywhere. He'd use it wisely. Every penny would go to Hannah, the field trip, new boots, maybe even some of those chapter books she'd been eyeing at the library. Nothing for himself. This gift was for his daughter's dreams, and he'd honor that intention exactly. He finished his shift that night with something unfamiliar lightening his steps. Hope. Not the desperate clinging by fingernails hope that had sustained him through the last 2 years, but actual, breathable hope. the kind that whispered maybe the universe hadn't completely forgotten about them. Jacob Miles had no way of knowing that his supervisor, Dennis Kohler, had been standing in the maintenance office doorway 30 minutes earlier, watching through the small window as Jacob discovered the envelope, had seen the gift card, had seen Jacob's face transform with relief and gratitude. And Dennis Kohler, who'd been passed over for the facilities manager promotion twice in the last 3 years, while watching younger, less experienced people climb past him, who'd been drinking in his car before his shift and nursing a resentment that had curdled into something poisonous, had seen an opportunity. Dennis waited 4 more days, watching Jacob with a predator's patience. He noticed the new boots Hannah wore when she arrived with her father Monday night, pink with little flowers, the kind that lit up when she walked. Noticed Jacob signing the field trip permission slip and tucking 2 20s into the envelope. Noticed the bag of groceries Jacob carried in Tuesday, real groceries instead of the food bank staples, including fresh fruit and the kind of snacks that came in name-brand packaging. On Thursday night, Dennis made his move. Jacob was on the 35th floor, deep in concentration as he repaired a jammed copy machine, one of those invisible acts of maintenance that saved the company service call fees but went completely unnoticed by anyone who mattered. He'd pulled the machine away from the wall and was lying on his back beneath it, flashlight in his teeth, adjusting the paper feed mechanism with tools from his personal kit. The factory supervisor skills he'd spent 12 years developing hadn't disappeared just because the factory had. He heard footsteps but didn't think much of it. Late-night employees wandered through sometimes. But then Dennis's voice cut through his concentration, sharp with false authority. "Miles, my office, now!" Jacob rolled out from under the copier, confused. Dennis stood in the doorway, arms crossed, face flushed, in a way that suggested either anger or alcohol, maybe both. "I'm almost done here, just need to—" "I said now." Dennis's voice went hard. "Unless you'd like to explain to HR why you're refusing a direct order." Something cold settled in Jacob's stomach. He carefully set down his tools and followed Dennis to the elevator, mind racing through possibilities. Had he missed a floor, gotten a complaint? But his work had been perfect lately, if anything better than usual now that he wasn't quite as exhausted, thanks to those groceries, meaning one less trip to the food bank. They rode down in silence, Dennis radiating hostility that Jacob couldn't decipher. The maintenance office was empty this time of night, except for Hannah, who looked up from her homework with worried eyes as they entered. "Hannah, sweetie, go wait in the break room," Jacob said gently. "But Daddy—" "Now, baby, please." She gathered her things and scurried out, shooting Dennis a distrustful look that made Jacob simultaneously proud and terrified. His daughter had good instincts. Dennis waited until the door closed, then turned to Jacob with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "We've got a problem, Miles." "What kind of problem?" "The kind where an employee has been stealing from the company." Dennis pulled out his phone, pulling up a photo. It showed Jacob at his locker holding the cream-colored envelope. "Care to explain where you got $500 in a prepaid gift card?" Jacob's mouth went dry. "It was a gift. Anonymous. I found it in my locker." "Anonymous?" Dennis's laugh was ugly. "Right. And I'm supposed to believe that?" "It's the truth. Someone left it. Someone left it, or you helped yourself to it from the lost and found. Maybe from someone's desk drawer." Dennis stepped closer, and Jacob could smell the whiskey now, sharp and stale. "We've had reports of missing cash, small amounts, nothing huge, but it adds up. I would never—" Jacob's voice cracked with the injustice of it. "I've never stolen anything in my life." "Then you won't mind if I search your locker." It wasn't really a question. Dennis was already moving to locker 47, pulling a master key from his pocket. Jacob wanted to protest, to demand this go through proper channels, but he was too stunned by the accusation to form coherent arguments. He'd spent 2 years doing everything right, working harder than anyone, helping where he could, and now he was being accused of theft? Dennis opened the locker and made a show of searching through Jacob's meager possessions. A spare uniform shirt, Hannah's emergency inhaler, a photo of Rebecca, a small Bible, the tools Jacob had bought himself for those extra repair jobs. And there, tucked into the corner, still in its envelope, the gift card, now with about $350 remaining. Well, well, Dennis pulled it out triumphantly. Still got it, huh? Most thieves are smart enough to spend the evidence. It was a gift. Jacob's voice rose, desperation creeping in. Check the cameras. You'll see I didn't take it from anywhere. Someone put it in my locker. Oh, I've checked the cameras. Dennis's smile widened. Funny thing, there's footage of someone in a very expensive suit leaving your locker area around the time this appeared. But the angle's bad, can't make out who. Could be anyone. Could be you in borrowed clothes creating an alibi. The logic was insane, but Jacob could see where this was heading. Dennis had decided he was guilty, and facts weren't going to change that conclusion. Why would I steal money and then keep it in my locker? That makes no sense. Thieves don't make sense. That's why they're thieves. Dennis pulled out his phone again. I'm calling security. No, please. Jacob hated the pleading in his voice, but he had no choice. I need this job. My daughter, I have a daughter. She needs the health insurance. Please just should have thought of that before you started stealing. The next 20 minutes were a blur of humiliation. Security arrived. 2 guards Jacob had always been friendly with, who now wouldn't meet his eyes. Dennis recited his accusations with the enthusiasm of a man who'd finally found someone beneath him to crush. Jacob tried to explain about the anonymous gift, the coat before it, the note about Hannah's dreams, but it all sounded increasingly desperate even to his own ears. And then Hannah appeared in the doorway. My daddy didn't steal anything. Her small voice cut through the adult conversation like a bell. She'd obviously been listening from the break room, and now she rushed to Jacob's side, wrapping her arms around his waist. He's a good person. He helps people. Hannah, go back to the break room, Jacob started. No. Tears streamed down her face, and she turned to Dennis with 7-year-old fury. You're mean. My daddy works so hard, and you're being mean to him. Dennis's face darkened. Control your kid, Miles. Something snapped in Jacob. Maybe it was the months of exhaustion. Maybe it was the injustice of being accused of theft, when he'd spent 2 years doing everything right. Maybe it was just the primal rage of a father watching his daughter cry because cruel men wielded power carelessly. Don't! His voice dropped to something dangerous. Don't you dare talk about my daughter. Or what? Dennis stepped closer, emboldened by the security guard's presence. You'll do what, exactly? You're done here, Miles. Fired for theft, effective immediately. Be grateful I'm not pressing charges. You can't fire him. Hannah was sobbing now. Please, he didn't do anything wrong. Jacob knelt, gathering his daughter close, trying to shield her from this nightmare. Shh, baby, it's okay. We're okay. But your job, we'll figure it out. He kissed her forehead, tasted her tears, felt his heart shatter into pieces he didn't know how to reassemble. We always do, remember? We're a team. Turn in your badge and uniform. Dennis's voice was almost gleeful. You've got 10 minutes to clear out your locker before I have you escorted from the building. Jacob stood slowly, forcing himself to breathe, to think past the red haze of rage and terror. He had exactly $847 in his bank account. Rent was $200 and due in 2 weeks. Hannah's school supplies needed replenishing. They had maybe 3 weeks of food if he stretched every meal. And now he had no job, no health insurance, no way to provide for his daughter. He gathered his belongings in silence while Hannah clung to his leg, hiccuping through her tears. The security guards watched uncomfortably, probably knowing this was wrong, but unwilling to challenge Dennis's authority. Jacob's hand shook as he pulled his personal tools from the locker, the Bible, Rebecca's photo. The gift card sat on Dennis's desk now, evidence of a crime Jacob hadn't committed. For what it's worth, one of the security guards said quietly as they walked Jacob and Hannah toward the exit. I don't think you did it, man. Dennis has always been a piece of work. Doesn't matter what you think, Jacob said flatly. Matters what happened. They emerged into the Chicago night at 3:47 a.m., rain starting to fall in cold sheets that immediately soaked through Jacob's uniform shirt. He'd turned in the coat, the company issued one, but kept his personal jacket around Hannah's shoulders. She was still crying, quieter now, but heartbroken in a way that made Jacob want to burn the whole building down. Daddy, where are we going to go? Good question. Home was 45 minutes away by bus and train, and the night routes were sparse. They'd have to wait hours for morning service. Jacob looked around the empty street, rain plastering his hair to his skull, water running into his eyes that might or might not have been just rain. "St. Christopher's," he said finally. "Pastor Marcus will let us wait in the shelter until morning." They walked through the rain, Hannah stumbling with exhaustion, Jacob carrying their meager possessions in a plastic bag. The same route he'd sent William Henderson down 2 weeks ago, looking for warmth and safety. The symmetry wasn't lost on him. The helper needing help, the giver receiving nothing. Pastor Marcus took one look at them and asked no questions, just ushered them into his small office with towels and hot coffee. Hannah fell asleep immediately on the worn couch, and Jacob sat in silence, watching his daughter breathe, trying to figure out how he was going to survive the next 24 hours, much less the next 24 years of raising her alone. Charlotte Wynne learned about the firing at 7:30 a.m. when her assistant mentioned in passing that there'd been an incident in the overnight shift. "What kind of incident?" Charlotte asked, not looking up from her laptop. "One of the custodians was fired for theft. Dennis Kohler caught him with a stolen gift card." Charlotte's blood went cold. Her fingers froze on the keyboard. "Which custodian?" Her assistant checked her notes. "Jacob Miles." The world tilted. Charlotte stood so abruptly her chair rolled backward and crashed into the credenza. "What? Is something wrong?" Everything. Everything was wrong. Charlotte's mind raced through the chain of causation. Her gift, left anonymously. Jacob finding it. Dennis somehow discovering it. The accusation, the firing, all because she'd wanted to help. "Get me Dennis Kohler, now. He'll be gone for the day, he works nights. Then get him on the phone. I don't care if he's sleeping. I don't care if he's on Mars. Get him. Now!" Her assistant fled, wisely recognizing Charlotte's tone as the one that preceded someone's career ending. Charlotte paced her office, mind working through scenarios and solutions. She'd caused this. Her anonymous kindness had destroyed a man's livelihood, had left that little girl without her father's income and insurance. The phone on her desk buzzed. "Mr. Kohler on line 2. Charlotte snatched it up. "What the hell happened last night?" Dennis's voice was thick with sleep and irritation. "Ms. Wynne, is there a problem?" "You fired Jacob Miles." "For theft, yes. He had a $500 gift card he couldn't explain. Clear grounds for—" "It wasn't theft." Charlotte forced herself to speak calmly, coldly, channeling all her fury into ice. "That gift card was placed in his locker by an authorized person as a bonus for exceptional work." Silence on the other end. Then, "There's no record of any authorized bonus." "Because it was meant to be anonymous. But I'm authorizing it now, retroactively. You fired an innocent man, Mr. Kohler." "With all due respect, ma'am, there are procedures for bonuses. They go through HR, through proper channels. An anonymous gift card in a locker is suspicious, and I acted appropriately given you acted like a petty tyrant with a grudge." Charlotte's control slipped, voice sharpening to the blade edge that made board members sweat. "Reinstate him immediately, with back pay and a formal apology." Ms. Wynne, I really don't think— I don't care what you think. Reinstate him, or I'll have HR review every decision you've made in the last 5 years. I'm sure we'll find some interesting patterns. Do I make myself clear?" Another pause. "Crystal clear, ma'am." "Good. I want him back on the schedule by tomorrow night." Charlotte hung up before Dennis could respond, then immediately buzzed her assistant. "Get me Jacob Miles's file. I need a home address." But when her assistant returned 10 minutes later, it was with concerning news. "Mr. Miles doesn't list a permanent address. Just a P.O. box for mail." Of course he didn't. He probably couldn't afford stable housing, probably moved between cheap motels or stayed with friends. Charlotte had just cost a homeless single father his only source of income. "Find him," she said. "I don't care how. Use whatever resources necessary. Find Jacob Miles and tell him he's been reinstated." She spent the rest of the day in meetings she couldn't focus on. Through lunch, she didn't taste. Past dinner, she forgot to eat. Her assistant finally located Jacob at St. Christopher's shelter around 8 p.m. Charlotte dispatched a car with a message. His firing had been a mistake. He was reinstated with a formal apology, and please report to work tomorrow night. But sitting in her office at midnight, watching the security feeds from the empty maintenance office, Charlotte knew the message wasn't enough. She tried to help anonymously and nearly destroyed him. She tried to fix it from a distance and probably humiliated him further. Maybe it was time to stop hiding behind cameras and gift cards. Maybe it was time to actually talk to Jacob Miles like a human being. The thought terrified her more than any hostile takeover or board rebellion ever had. Jacob reported to work the next night with Hannah in tow, neither of them quite believing the message was real. The car that had arrived at the shelter had seemed too fancy, the apology too formal, the whole thing too good to be true. But Pastor Marcus had urged him to at least check, and Jacob had nothing else resembling a plan. Dennis was waiting in the maintenance office, looking like he'd swallowed glass. "Miles, about last night." "Don't." Jacob's voice was flat. "Just tell me if I really have my job back or if this is some kind of sick joke. You're reinstated, full back pay. It was a misunderstanding." The word clearly caused Dennis physical pain. The gift card was authorized after all. Authorized by who? Dennis's jaw clenched. "Above my pay grade, just get back to work." Jacob stood there trying to process this reversal. Someone had overridden Dennis, someone powerful enough to make a supervisor eat crow and reinstate a fired employee overnight. The same someone who had left the coat and the gift card? "One more thing," Dennis said, pulling an envelope from his desk. "You're being transferred, new position, different shift." Ice flooded Jacob's veins. "What?" "Facility maintenance mechanic, day shift, Monday through Friday, 8 to 5. $18 an hour instead of $13. Benefits package stays the same." Dennis thrust the envelope at Jacob like it burned his fingers. "Starts Monday. You'll be working in the warehouse facility across town, maintaining equipment, fixing machinery, your factory experience finally being put to use." Jacob took the envelope with numb fingers. This wasn't just reinstatement. This was a promotion. A massive promotion that would change everything. Daylight hours meant Hannah could have a normal childhood, a real bedroom, could stop doing homework at 2 a.m. Better pay meant actual security, maybe even savings. "I don't understand," he whispered. "Neither do I." Dennis's expression was sour with resentment. "But apparently someone very high up thinks you walk on water. Congratulations, Miles. You've got a guardian angel." After Dennis left, Jacob sat in the empty maintenance office, staring at the transfer paperwork. Hannah climbed into his lap, and he held her tight, breathing in the kid shampoo smell of her hair. "Daddy, is it good news?" "Yeah, baby, really good news." His voice cracked. "You're going to have a normal life, real bedtimes, real dinners. I'll pick you up from school every day." "Really?" Hannah's face lit up with hope that stabbed straight through his heart. "Every day?" "Every single day." He kissed her forehead. "Someone's been helping us, Hannah. Someone we don't even know." "An angel," she said confidently, echoing his words from that night with the coat. "Angels help people who help people. That's what Mommy used to say." Rebecca had said that. In another lifetime, when the world made sense and good things happened to good people more than once in a blue moon. Jacob didn't know who his guardian angel was, but he made a silent promise to the universe. He'd pay this forward. Somehow, someday, he'd be someone else's anonymous miracle. He had no idea that his mysterious benefactor was at that moment sitting in her penthouse office, watching him on security feeds, tears streaming down her face for the first time in 5 years. Charlotte Wynne had bought a man's life back with a single phone call, and the relief flooding through her was so intense it felt like resurrection. But she'd also learned a terrifying lesson. Anonymous kindness was a minefield. Good intentions weren't enough. If she wanted to help Jacob Miles, and God help her, she did, she needed to do it right. Which meant she needed to actually meet him, talk to him, stop playing fairy godmother from behind a camera, and actually engage like a human being. The prospect made her want to vomit. Charlotte Wynne didn't do vulnerable, didn't do personal. Her ex-husband had complained for years that she treated relationships like business transactions, that she could negotiate a billion-dollar merger, but couldn't tell him she loved him without sounding like she was closing a deal. But maybe, she thought, watching Jacob Miles hold his daughter in that dingy maintenance office, maybe it was time to learn. She picked up her phone and texted her assistant. Schedule a tour of the warehouse facility for Monday morning. I want to meet the new mechanic personally. The assistant responded immediately. That's unusual. Any particular reason? Charlotte stared at the message for a long time. 1,000 reasons. No reasons that made sense. Finally, she typed, I believe in recognizing good work, and Jacob Miles is exceptional. She hit send before she could overthink it, then turned back to the security feeds for one last look. Jacob and Hannah were leaving now, her hand in his, both of them walking with lighter steps than they'd had in months. You're welcome, Charlotte whispered to the empty office. She didn't know that in 72 hours, the security footage would leak. Didn't know that the country was about to discover Jacob Miles and transform him from invisible janitor to national symbol. Didn't know that the cameras she'd used to witness his kindness would become the weapon that destroyed both their lives. For now, in the quiet space between disaster and redemption, two lonely people went to their respective homes. One to a small apartment that finally felt like possibility. One to a massive penthouse that finally felt like a prison. And both slept better than they had in months. The storm was coming. But tonight, for just a few hours, there was peace. The peace lasted exactly 3 days. Monday morning arrived with the kind of crisp November sunshine that made Chicago almost bearable. And Jacob woke up at 6 a.m. for the first time in 18 months without feeling like death warmed over. Hannah was still asleep in her bed, an actual bed, not a couch in a corporate break room, and the sight of her peaceful face made his chest ache with gratitude so intense it was almost painful. He made her pancakes for breakfast, real pancakes, from scratch, not the frozen kind you microwaved. She ate them drowsy and delighted, syrup on her chin, chattering about a book report she was excited to write, instead of dreading the homework she'd have to finish after midnight. You're really going to pick me up today? She asked for the third time, as if repetition would make the miracle more real. 3:15, right outside the main entrance, Jacob confirmed, braiding her hair the way Rebecca used to. He wasn't as good at it, but he was getting better. Every single day from now on, baby. Promise. He walked her to the bus stop, kissed her forehead, watched the yellow school bus swallow her up, and carry her toward a normal childhood. Then, he stood on that corner for a long moment, face tilted toward the sun, letting himself feel something he'd almost forgotten, hope that wasn't laced with desperation. The warehouse facility was a 40-minute bus ride across town, a sprawling complex of industrial buildings where Glass Ridge stored supplies and maintained equipment for all their Chicago locations. Jacob arrived 20 minutes early, nervous energy propelling him through the doors and toward the maintenance supervisor's office. The supervisor, a gruff but fair-seeming man named Ray Cooper, greeted him with a firm handshake. You're Miles? Heard good things. Used to be a factory supervisor at Riverside? 12 years, Jacob confirmed. Then you'll do fine here. We've got hydraulic systems that need constant attention, conveyor belts that jam every other Tuesday, and about 40 pieces of equipment that should have been replaced a decade ago, but management keeps patching them together. Ray grinned. Basically, job security for anyone who knows their way around a wrench. Jacob felt something unknot in his shoulders. This was work he understood, work he was good at. When do I start? Right now, but first. Ray checked his watch. CEO's coming by for some kind of inspection tour. Upper management wants all the new hires lined up to meet her. Political theater, you know how it is. Jacob's stomach dropped. The CEO? Charlotte Wynn? The Ice Queen herself. Ray didn't notice Jacob's sudden tension. Don't worry, she probably won't even remember your name. Just shake her hand, say, yes ma'am, and get back to work. But Jacob's mind was racing. Charlotte Wynn was coming here today, his first day. The same day he started a mysteriously generous promotion that had appeared out of nowhere after he was fired for a gift card that had also appeared out of nowhere. The same gift card someone above Dennis's pay grade had authorized. His guardian angel wasn't an angel at all. It was the CEO. The realization hit him like cold water. All those small miracles, the coat, the gift card, the reinstatement, this promotion, they weren't divine intervention or random kindness. They were Charlotte Wynn, watching him on security cameras, deciding he was some kind of charity case worth saving. The gratitude he'd felt all morning curdled into something complicated and uncomfortable. He didn't want to be anyone's project, didn't want to owe his survival to a billionaire's whim. But before he could process the implications, Ray was herding him and 3 other new employees into the main warehouse floor, lining them up like schoolchildren awaiting inspection. Jacob positioned himself at the end of the line, hoping maybe she wouldn't notice him, wouldn't make the connection. Then Charlotte Wynne walked through those warehouse doors, and every hope of invisibility evaporated. She was smaller than he'd expected from her reputation, maybe 5'6" in heels, but she carried herself with the kind of authority that made her seem taller. Her suit was ice blue, perfectly tailored, and her blonde hair was pulled back in a style so severe it looked painful. But her eyes, as they swept across the assembled employees, were nothing like the coldness he'd expected. They were searching, almost nervous, until they landed on him. Recognition flickered across her face for just a fraction of a second before her professional mask slammed back into place. "Good morning," she said, her voice carrying across the warehouse with practiced ease. "Thank you all for joining Glassridge. We believe in investing in people and recognizing talent regardless of where it's been hiding." Her gaze kept drifting back to Jacob, and he felt like an insect under a microscope. Ray introduced each new employee, and Charlotte shook hands, offered polite words, moved down the line with mechanical efficiency, until she reached Jacob. "And this is Jacob Miles," Ray said. 12 years factory experience, mechanical specialist. We're lucky to have him." Charlotte extended her hand, and Jacob took it because refusing would have been insane. Her grip was firm, businesslike, but her hand trembled slightly against his palm. "Mr. Miles." Her voice was carefully neutral. "Welcome to Glass Ridge." "Thank you, Ms. Wynne." He couldn't quite keep the edge from his tone. "It's been an eventful week." Something flickered in her eyes. Guilt? Fear? But she released his hand and moved on. The rest of the tour was a blur. Jacob went through the motions, nodded at appropriate times, but his mind was screaming questions he couldn't ask. Why him? What did she want? Was this genuine kindness or some kind of weird corporate experiment? The tour ended, Charlotte departed in her Mercedes with tinted windows, and Jacob threw himself into work with manic intensity. He rebuilt a hydraulic pump, cleared a jammed conveyor system, diagnosed an electrical issue that had been plaguing the loading dock for weeks. By lunch, Ray was looking at him like he'd discovered a secret weapon. "Where the hell have you been hiding?" Ray asked, watching Jacob expertly rewire a control panel. "This is work we usually contract out." "Just needed someone to give me a chance," Jacob said quietly. He thought about Charlotte Wynne's trembling hand, her guilty eyes. Maybe she had given him a chance. Maybe he should be grateful instead of resentful. But the feeling of being watched, of being someone's charity case, stuck in his throat like spoiled food. At 3:15, Jacob picked up Hannah from school for the first time in 18 months. She ran to him with a shriek of joy, backpack bouncing, and threw herself into his arms with enough force to nearly knock him over. "You came! You really came!" "Told you I would." He spun her around, her laughter bright as bells. "Every day, baby. This is our new normal." They took the bus home together, Hannah chattering about her day, her friends, her book report on dolphins. Normal kid concerns, normal kid joy. Jacob felt tears prick his eyes and blinked them away, not wanting to explain to his daughter why Daddy was crying on a city bus. That evening, he made dinner, spaghetti with actual meat sauce, not just plain noodles, and they ate at their small table while Hannah did homework that didn't require her to stay up until 2 a.m. At 7:30, he tucked her into bed with a story and a prayer, and her stuffed elephant clutched tight. "Daddy," she mumbled, already half asleep. "Is this real, or is it going to go away?" The question broke his heart. "It's real, Hannah Banana. I promise." "Good," she yawned. "I like normal." Jacob sat in their tiny living room after she fell asleep, staring at nothing, trying to reconcile his gratitude with his discomfort. He should write a thank you note to Charlotte Wynne. He should accept his miraculous good fortune with grace and humility. He should... His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "This is Charlotte Wynne. I hope I'm not overstepping, but I wanted to say I'm glad you're settling in well. You deserved this opportunity. Please don't think of it as charity. Think of it as the company finally recognizing your value." Jacob stared at the message for a long time. How had she gotten his number? More surveillance? Or did she just have access to employee records? He typed and deleted 3 different responses before finally settling on, "Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity." Neutral, professional, giving nothing away. Her response came seconds later. "You're welcome." And Jacob, "I'm sorry about what happened with Dennis. That should never have occurred. He could have left it there. Should have left it there." But something in him needed to push back, needed to assert some kind of agency in a situation where he'd been a passive recipient of favors he never asked for. "Why are you doing this?" he typed. "Why me?" 3 minutes passed. 5. He assumed she wasn't going to answer, and that was answer enough. But then his phone buzzed again. "Because I watched you give your coat to a homeless veteran in a stairwell at 3 a.m. Because I watched you fix things no one asked you to fix and help people who never said thank you. Because my father was a janitor and he taught me that the measure of a person isn't their position but their character. And you, Jacob Miles, have more character than anyone I've ever met." Jacob read the message 3 times, something softening in his chest despite his resistance. She wasn't making him a project. She was seeing him, actually seeing him, the way almost nobody had since Rebecca died. "Your father sounds like a good man," he replied. "He was. He would have liked you." They texted back and forth for the next hour, conversation flowing easier than Jacob would have thought possible. She asked about Hannah, about his plans, about whether the warehouse work was satisfying. He asked about her company, her vision, what drove someone to build an empire. Their words were careful, circling around deeper truths, but there was a connection forming that felt both inevitable and terrifying. Finally, at 10 p.m., Charlotte wrote, "I should let you sleep, but thank you for talking with me. I promise I'm not monitoring you or treating you like a charity case. I saw someone doing good in a world that rarely rewards it, and I wanted to help. If that's overstepping, please tell me." Jacob thought about that for a long time before responding. "It's not overstepping. It's just a lot. I'm not used to people caring. Get used to it. You deserve people caring." He fell asleep with his phone in his hand, something that felt dangerously like happiness warming his chest. For the first time since Rebecca's death, Jacob Miles felt less alone in the world. The feeling lasted exactly 12 hours. Tuesday morning, Jacob woke to 17 missed calls and 43 text messages. His first thought was that something had happened to Hannah, panic flooding his system. But she was still asleep in her bed, peaceful and unaware. The messages were from numbers he didn't recognize, from people he hadn't spoken to in years, from reporters asking for comments. Confused and terrified, Jacob opened the first news link someone had sent him. The headline made his blood run cold. "America's kind janitor, CEO caught spying on employees' good deeds." Below it was a photo, security camera footage of Jacob giving his coat to William Henderson in the stairwell, and another photo of Charlotte Wynn at her desk, clearly watching security monitors. And a third photo of the gift card appearing in his locker, timestamp visible. The article was brutal. It painted Charlotte as a creepy voyeur who'd become obsessed with a lowly employee, monitoring his every move, manipulating his life from her executive tower. The quotes from anonymous sources were devastating. "She watched him for weeks without his knowledge or consent. It's a gross violation of privacy and an abuse of power. This is what happens when billionaires think they can play God with working people's lives." Jacob Miles is a victim of corporate surveillance and Charlotte Wynn's twisted savior complex. Jacob read the article 3 times, his stomach churning. They'd gotten the facts right, but twisted the interpretation into something ugly. Yes, Charlotte had watched him. Yes, she'd helped anonymously. But it hadn't been creepy or predatory. It had been someone trying to do good in the only way she knew how. His phone rang. An actual reporter this time. "Mr. Miles, this is Jennifer Walsh from Channel 7 News. We'd love to get your perspective on the story." Jacob hung up. Another call came immediately. He turned his phone off, hands shaking. Hannah emerged from her bedroom, rubbing her eyes. "Daddy, why are there people on our street?" Jacob went to the window and felt his heart sink. News vans, 3 of them, parked outside their apartment building, cameras and reporters clustered like vultures. "Stay inside," he told Hannah, forcing his voice to stay calm. "Don't go near the windows." What's happening? How did he explain this to a 7-year-old? That his small acts of kindness had been recorded, broadcast, turned into a national news story that was simultaneously making him a hero and destroying the woman who'd helped him. "Some people want to talk to Daddy about work," he said finally, "but we're going to stay home today, okay? Have a pajama day." He called Ray Cooper to explain he couldn't come in. The warehouse was probably swarmed too. Then reluctantly, he turned his phone back on and found Charlotte's number. "I'm so sorry," he texted. "I don't know how this leaked, but I never wanted this. I'll tell them it wasn't what they're saying." Her response came immediately. Don't. Don't defend me or explain anything. This will blow over. Just keep you and Hannah safe, but they're destroying your reputation." "I don't care about my reputation. I care that you and your daughter aren't harassed because of my actions. Please, Jacob, stay out of it. Let my lawyers handle this." Jacob wanted to argue, but another call was coming through. Then another. His phone had become a weapon, buzzing constantly with strangers demanding pieces of him. The story exploded across social media faster than wildfire. By noon, Hanchet Kind Janitor was trending nationally. Videos emerged, security footage of Jacob fixing that conference room stain, helping an elderly employee carry boxes, staying late to repair broken equipment. Someone had compiled an entire montage of his invisible kindnesses, scored to emotional music, and it had been viewed 40 million times in 6 hours. People were calling him a hero, a symbol of working-class virtue, proof that goodness still existed in America. They were selling T-shirts with his face on them. Someone started a GoFundMe that had already raised $200,000. And they were absolutely crucifying Charlotte Wynn. The board of Glass Ridge Financial called an emergency meeting. Shareholders were panicking. The hashtag Neshtahad Surveillance CEO was competing with hashtag Kind Janitor, and protesters were gathering outside the corporate tower demanding Charlotte's resignation. Jacob watched it all unfold on his TV screen, trapped in his apartment while Hannah asked questions he couldn't answer. The narrative had spiraled completely out of control. Charlotte was either a stalker or a saint, depending on which channel you watched. Jacob was either a victim or a grifter. Nobody seemed interested in the truth, which was far more complicated than any headline could capture. By Wednesday, Charlotte's position was untenable. The board voted to place her on administrative leave pending an investigation into inappropriate monitoring of employees. In her official statement, delivered from a podium outside Glass Ridge headquarters, she looked smaller than Jacob remembered, her voice steady, but her eyes exhausted. "I take full responsibility for any discomfort my actions caused Mr. Miles or any other employee. My intention was never to surveil or manipulate, but I understand how my behavior could be interpreted that way. I am stepping back from my position to allow for a thorough review of our security protocols and employee privacy policies. I apologize to everyone affected by this situation." She didn't mention that she'd been trying to help, didn't defend herself or explain her motivations, just fell on her sword with the kind of dignity that made Jacob want to scream. He tried calling her. The number was disconnected. He tried emailing. Messages bounced back. Charlotte Wynn had disappeared behind a wall of lawyers and PR handlers, and Jacob was left on the other side, watching her world collapse because she dared to care about his. Thursday morning brought the cruelest twist yet. Hannah came running into the kitchen where Jacob was making breakfast, her face pale with terror. "Daddy, I don't feel good." Then she collapsed. Jacob caught her before she hit the floor, his cook's hands suddenly medical, checking her pulse, her breathing, her pupils. She was conscious but weak, her heartbeat irregular beneath his fingers. "Hannah, baby, stay with me. What's wrong?" "My chest feels funny, like squeezing." Her voice was small and scared. Jacob's own heart stopped. He grabbed his phone, punched 911, gave their address to the operator with a voice that sounded nothing like his own. The ambulance arrived in 7 minutes that felt like 7 years, and he rode with Hannah to Northwestern Memorial, holding her small hand while paramedics worked and monitors beeped their mechanical alarm. At the hospital, a young ER doctor examined Hannah with efficient gentleness, while Jacob answered questions in a voice made of static and fear. Yes, she'd been tired lately. Yes, she sometimes got short of breath. No, he hadn't thought it was serious. Kids got tired, right? Kids got winded. It didn't mean... "Mr. Miles." The doctor's expression was kind but grave. "We need to run some tests. Hannah's presenting with symptoms that concern me. Has she ever been diagnosed with any heart conditions?" The word heart made Jacob's vision tunnel. "No, she's healthy. She's always been healthy. But she hadn't been, had she? He thought about the time she'd seemed too tired for a 7-year-old, the way she sometimes had to sit down during their walks home. The shortness of breath he'd attributed to just being small, being young, being fine. He'd been so focused on survival, on keeping them housed and fed and afloat, that he'd missed the signs his daughter was sick. The test took 3 hours. Hannah was admitted for observation, hooked up to monitors that tracked her heart's every uncertain beat, and Jacob sat beside her bed holding her hand while doctors consulted in hushed voices outside the room. Finally, a cardiologist came in. Dr. Sarah Chen was in her 40s with warm eyes and a gentle voice that somehow made the devastating news even harder to bear. Mr. Miles, Hannah has a congenital heart defect called tetralogy of Fallot. It's a combination of 4 abnormalities that affect blood flow through the heart. She was likely born with it, but the symptoms can be subtle in early childhood and worsen over time. Jacob's mouth was dry as desert sand. How do we fix it? Dr. Chen pulled up a chair, and Jacob knew from that gesture alone that the answer would be complicated. She needs open heart surgery. It's a complex procedure, but it has a high success rate. Without it, however, her condition will continue to deteriorate. She'll have increasing difficulty breathing, reduced stamina, and eventually heart failure. The room tilted. When? As soon as possible. The next available surgical slot is in 2 weeks, but honestly, I'd prefer to do it sooner. Her oxygen levels are concerning. How much? Jacob's voice was barely a whisper. How much does the surgery cost? Dr. Chen's pause told him everything. With your insurance through Glass Ridge, you'll have substantial coverage, but there will be out-of-pocket costs, deductibles, co-pays, potential complications. Realistically, you're looking at $15,000 to $25,000 in expenses not covered by insurance. $25,000. Jacob had $847 in his bank account. The GoFundMe that strangers had started for him had money, but touching that felt wrong, felt like profiting from the chaos that had destroyed Charlotte's life. He'd been at his new job for exactly 4 days, hadn't even received his first paycheck. Is there a payment plan? Financial assistance? Absolutely. We have social workers who can help you navigate that. But Mr. Miles, Dr. Chen's expression was deeply sympathetic. Even with assistance, you're going to need to raise significant funds. And we can't delay surgery while you figure out finances. Hannah needs this operation within 2 weeks, 3 at the absolute maximum. After Dr. Chen left, Jacob sat beside his sleeping daughter and tried to breathe through the crushing weight on his chest. This was his worst nightmare made flesh. Hannah sick, needing something he couldn't provide, and time running out to save her. He thought about the GoFundMe, about swallowing his pride and accepting money from strangers who saw him as a symbol instead of a person, about calling Charlotte Wynne, if he could even reach her, and begging for help. Hannah stirred, her small hand tightening around his. Daddy? I'm here, baby, right here. Am I going to be okay? The question destroyed him. He wanted to promise, to make guarantees he had no power to fulfill, but he'd never lied to his daughter, and he wouldn't start now. You're going to have surgery to fix your heart, he said gently, and it's going to be scary, and it's going to be hard. But the doctors are really good, and I'm going to be right there the whole time. And when it's over, you're going to be able to run and play without getting tired. You're going to be better than okay. Promise? God, he wanted to promise. Wanted to tell her that love could heal anything, that fathers could protect their children from every harm, that the universe wouldn't dare take another person he loved. But he thought about Rebecca, her hand going limp in his as the paramedics worked, thought about promises made and broken by forces beyond his control. I promise I'll do everything in my power, he said finally, and I promise I love you more than anything in the whole world. It would have to be enough. That night, while Hannah slept under medical observation, Jacob sat in the hospital chapel and prayed harder than he'd prayed since the night Rebecca died. The words weren't elegant, just a father's desperate plea to any higher power listening. Please, please don't take her. Take me instead, take everything I have, but please let my daughter live. She's good and innocent and the only light left in my life. Please. His phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. I just heard. I'm so sorry. I've set up a medical trust for Hannah. All expenses covered, no questions asked, no strings attached. Just let me help. Please. Charlotte. Jacob read the message through tears he couldn't stop. She'd lost her position, her reputation, maybe her entire career, all because she'd tried to help him, and she was still trying to help, still reaching out from whatever wreckage she was navigating to make sure his daughter survived. He thought about pride, about independence, about being a man who solved his own problems. Then he thought about Hannah's small hand in his, her question, "Am I going to be okay?" Some battles you couldn't fight alone. Some gifts you had to accept with grace, even when accepting felt like surrender. "Thank you," he texted back. "I don't know how to repay you." Her response came immediately. "You already did. You reminded me that kindness matters. That's worth more than any CEO title." In different parts of Chicago, one in a hospital chapel, one in a penthouse that felt like exile, two people sat alone with their fears and their hopes, connected by threads of compassion that had somehow become complicated beyond recognition. The surgery was scheduled for Monday. 6 days to prepare for the longest day of Jacob's life. 6 days to find faith that felt increasingly elusive. But as he walked back to Hannah's room, watching her sleep through the window with monitors tracking her fragile heartbeat, Jacob made a decision. Win or lose, survive or break, he would fight for his daughter with everything he had. And if that meant accepting help from Charlotte Wynn, from the GoFundMe strangers, from a universe that seemed to give and take in equal, random measure, so be it. Hannah's drawing was taped to the wall beside her bed, the one she'd made weeks ago. 2 stick figures holding hands beneath a smiling sun, with a message written in crayon. Angels help people who help people. Maybe she'd been right all along. Maybe accepting help was its own act of faith, its own form of strength. Jacob pressed his hand against the window glass, sending his love through barriers invisible and unbreakable, and promised his sleeping daughter that she would see the sunrise on the other side of this darkness, even if he had no idea how to make that promise come true. The weekend stretched before Jacob like a vast, unknowable ocean. Friday night bled into Saturday morning while he sat beside Hannah's hospital bed, watching her chest rise and fall with a rhythm that seemed both miraculous and terrifyingly fragile. The monitors beeped their steady reassurance, but Jacob had learned that machines could lie, that steady beeps could become flat lines in the space between heartbeats. Hannah woke around dawn, confused and groggy from the mild sedatives they'd given her. "Where are we?" "Still at the hospital, baby." Jacob smoothed her curls back, his hand gentle despite the exhaustion making his fingers tremble. "Remember? We're getting you all fixed up." "My chest doesn't hurt anymore." "That's good. That's really good." He kept his voice light, didn't tell her that the absence of pain was probably just the medications masking symptoms that would return the moment the drugs wore off. "How about some breakfast? I bet we can get the nurse to find you some pancakes." Hannah's face brightened, and Jacob felt that familiar ache of love so intense it bordered on pain. How many more mornings would he get to see that smile? How many more conversations? How many more shared pancakes and bedtime stories and arguments about homework? The thought was unbearable, so he pushed it down deep where all his other terrors lived and focused on the immediate, manageable present. Breakfast. 1 meal at a time. 1 minute at a time. Dr. Chen stopped by mid-morning with an update. "We've got her scheduled for Monday at 6 a.m. Dr. Richard Foster will be her surgeon. He's one of the best pediatric cardiac surgeons in the country. Hannah's in excellent hands." "How long will the surgery take?" Jacob asked, though he'd already Googled this information 100 times, reading medical journals and patient forms until the words blurred into incomprehensible terror. 4 to 6 hours, depending on what we find when we open her up. The recovery will be several days in the ICU, then potentially a week or more in the regular pediatric ward. Dr. Chen's expression was professionally sympathetic. "I know it's frightening, Mr. Miles, but tetralogy of Fallot repairs have a success rate above 95%. Hannah's young and otherwise healthy. The odds are very much in her favor." 95%, which meant 5% didn't make it. 1 in 20 children went into that operating room and never came back out. Jacob knew statistics were cold comfort, that someone's child had to be that 5%, that prayers and hope and desperate love didn't actually influence surgical outcomes. But he clung to that 95% like a drowning man clutching driftwood. After Dr. Chen left, Jacob pulled out his phone and stared at the GoFundMe page someone had created. The total had climbed to $340,000. $340,000 from strangers who'd seen security camera footage and decided his kindness was worth rewarding. The comments section was full of people sharing their own stories, offering prayers, calling him inspirational. It felt obscene somehow, profiting from the worst moment of his life, accepting money because his daughter's heart was failing and the country had decided he was worthy of saving. But Charlotte's medical trust wouldn't cover everything. There would be follow-up care, medications, potential complications. And if something went wrong during surgery, if Hannah needed additional procedures or extended care, those costs would multiply faster than Jacob could imagine. Pride was expensive. His daughter's life was priceless. Jacob clicked the withdrawal button and began the process of accepting the funds. Each keystroke felt like a small death of the man he used to be. The factory supervisor who'd never needed charity, who'd provided for his family through honest work and careful planning. But that man had died 2 years ago in a car crash that took his wife and his certainty about how the world worked. This Jacob, this new version forged in grief and night shifts and impossible choices, knew that accepting help wasn't weakness. It was survival, and survival was the only thing that mattered when your daughter's life hung in the balance. His phone rang. Pastor Marcus from St. Christopher's Shelter. "Jacob's son, I heard about Hannah. The whole congregation is praying." "Thank you, Pastor," Jacob's voice cracked. "I appreciate it. More than prayers, we're taking up a special collection, and I've called some other churches in the area. We're organizing a prayer vigil for Monday morning during her surgery. You won't be alone in this." The kindness was overwhelming. Jacob had to press his hand against his mouth to hold back the sob threatening to escape. "You don't have to—" "Yes, we do. That's what family does, and your family, Jacob. You've given so much to others. Let people give back to you now." After they hung up, Jacob sat in the uncomfortable hospital chair and let himself cry for the first time since Hannah's collapse. Quiet tears that wouldn't wake his sleeping daughter, but tears nonetheless. Grief and fear and gratitude all tangled together into something too complex for words. A soft knock on the door interrupted his breakdown. Jacob wiped his eyes quickly, expecting a nurse, but instead found a woman in her 60s wearing an expensive coat and an expression of determined compassion. "Mr. Miles? I'm Eleanor Foster, Dr. Foster's wife. I hope I'm not intruding." Jacob stood, confused. "Ma'am? My husband mentioned Hannah's case, and I just—" Eleanor's eyes were kind, the kind that had seen suffering and chosen empathy. "I lost a child to leukemia 30 years ago. I know what you're feeling right now. I know how impossible it is to breathe when your baby is sick. I'm sorry for your loss." The words felt inadequate, but Jacob didn't know what else to say. "Thank you. Sarah was 7 when we lost her, same age as Hannah." Eleanor pulled a small card from her purse. "This is my personal number. If you need anything during the surgery, someone to sit with you, someone to just listen, please call. The waiting is the hardest part. You shouldn't have to do it alone." She left before Jacob could properly thank her, this stranger offering comfort from a place of profound understanding. The card felt warm in his hand, a small light against the darkness pressing in from all sides. Sunday arrived with the weight of last chances. Hannah was scheduled for surgery in less than 24 hours, and Jacob found himself mentally cataloging everything he wanted to tell her, just in case. Just in case 95% wasn't enough. Just in case his prayers went unanswered like they had when Rebecca lay broken in that intersection. They spent the day doing ordinary things made extraordinary by context. Jacob read her favorite books, his voice steady even as his heart shattered. They played card games and watched movies and talked about everything and nothing. Hannah seemed to sense something momentous approaching, growing quieter as the day progressed. "Daddy?" she asked around dinner time, picking at the hospital food. "What if I don't wake up?" The question stopped Jacob's heart. "Hannah, I heard the nurses talking. They said some kids don't wake up from surgery." Her dark eyes were too old for 7, filled with awareness no child should carry. "What if I'm one of them?" Jacob set down his own untouched food and pulled her into his lap, careful of her IV lines and monitor wires. Baby, listen to me. You're going to wake up. Dr. Foster is the best, and your heart is strong even if it needs a little fixing. You're going to wake up, and you're going to feel better than you've felt in a long time. But you don't know for sure. He couldn't lie to her. No, I don't know for sure. Nobody knows the future, Hannah Banana, but I believe with everything in me that you're going to be okay. And no matter what happens, no matter what, you need to know that you are loved, so deeply, so completely loved, by me, by everyone who knows you, and by your mama watching from heaven. Hannah was quiet for a long moment, then said, Mama told me something once, before she died. Jacob's throat closed. Hannah rarely talked about Rebecca. The memories were too painful, too distant for her young mind to fully grasp. What did she tell you? She said angels help people who help people. That's why I drew that picture, remember? Because you help people, Daddy, so angels will help me. Her conviction was absolute, childlike faith that made Jacob want to scream at the universe for being so random, so uncaring, so willing to take mothers and threaten daughters. But instead, he held her close and said, Then you're going to be surrounded by angels tomorrow, because I've never met anyone with a bigger heart than you. They fell asleep together in her hospital bed. Jacob curled protectively around his daughter, memorizing the weight of her against his chest, the sound of her breathing, the miracle of her existence. If these were his last hours with Hannah, he would spend them holding her close, pouring every ounce of love he possessed into this small person who'd become his entire reason for living. Monday morning arrived too soon and not soon enough. Pre-op began at 4:30 a.m. with efficiency that felt both comforting and terrifying. Nurses moved through their checklist with practiced calm, while Jacob helped Hannah into her surgical gown, his hands shaking as he tied the strings. You look like a superhero in that cape, he told her, forcing brightness into his voice. Hannah managed a weak smile. It's a hospital gown, Daddy. Perspective, baby. It's all about perspective. Dr. Foster came in at 5:15, his presence radiating competence and quiet authority. He was in his 60s with salt and pepper hair and the kind of steady hands you wanted opening your child's chest. He knelt beside Hannah's bed, speaking to her directly rather than over her head. Hannah, I'm going to fix your heart today. You're going to fall asleep, and when you wake up, you'll feel like you've been on a long journey. But your dad will be right there when you open your eyes, okay? Will it hurt? We'll make sure you have medicine so it doesn't hurt too much. And every day, you'll feel a little better. Before you know it, you'll be running around like the 7-year-old you're supposed to be. They wheeled Hannah toward the operating room at 5:45. Jacob walked alongside her gurney, holding her hand, memorizing her face. At the doors to the surgical wing, he had to stop. This was as far as parents could go. I love you, Hannah, more than all the stars in the sky. Love you more, Daddy. Love you most. Her voice was drowsy from the pre-sedation, but her grip on his hand was strong. Then the doors swung shut, and she was gone, and Jacob stood in an empty hallway feeling like someone had reached into his chest and ripped out his own heart. Eleanor Foster appeared at his elbow as if summoned. Come on, I'll show you where to wait. The surgical waiting room was designed for this particular flavor of hell, comfortable enough that you couldn't complain, impersonal enough that you couldn't forget where you were or why. Jacob sat in a chair by the window overlooking the city and tried to pray, but the words wouldn't come. His faith felt as fragile as Hannah's heartbeat, threatening to give out under the strain of fear. Pastor Marcus arrived at 6:30 with half his congregation. They filled a corner of the waiting room, heads bowed, voices rising in prayer and song. Jacob felt their support like a physical presence, these people who barely knew him choosing to spend their Monday morning begging God to spare a child they'd never met. At 7 o'clock, his phone buzzed. A text from Charlotte. Thinking of you and Hannah today. You're both in my prayers. Jacob stared at that message, this woman who'd lost everything trying to help him, still reaching out from whatever exile she'd retreated into. He typed back, Thank you. For everything. I mean it. Her response came immediately. She's going to be fine. I feel it. And Jacob, you're an incredible father. She's lucky to have you. The hours crawled by with agonizing slowness. 8:00 a.m. became, and o'clock became 10:00, and Jacob aged a year with each passing minute. Dr. Chen stopped by twice with updates. Everything proceeding normally, no complications so far. But Jacob couldn't relax, couldn't breathe, couldn't do anything but stare at the clock and will time to move faster, slower, in any direction that brought his daughter back to him. At 10:47, his phone rang. Unknown number. Jacob answered with shaking hands. Mr. Miles, this is Jennifer Walsh from Channel 7 News. We're outside the hospital. Can we get a statement about Hannah's surgery? Our viewers have been following your story. Jacob hung up without responding. Then he turned his phone off completely, unable to deal with the reality that his daughter's crisis had become entertainment for millions of strangers. Eleanor brought him coffee around 11:00. You should eat something. Can't. The thought of food made his stomach revolt. Richard's been doing these surgeries for 30 years. He's never lost a child to a routine tetralogy repair. She squeezed Jacob's shoulder. I know that doesn't make it easier, but he's the best there is. At 11:23 a.m., Dr. Foster emerged from the surgical wing still in his scrubs, mask dangling around his neck. Jacob stood so fast his chair toppled backward. Dr. Foster's expression was tired but smiling, and Jacob felt his knees go weak with relief, so intense it was physically painful. She did great, Dr. Foster said. The repair went exactly as planned. Her heart's beating strong and steady. She's in recovery now, should wake up in the next hour or so. Jacob couldn't speak, could only stand there while tears streamed down his face, and Pastor Marcus's congregation erupted in shouts of praise behind him. Dr. Foster gripped his shoulder, this stranger who'd held Jacob's daughter's life in his hands and given it back intact. She's going to be okay, Mr. Miles. Your little girl is going to be just fine. The recovery room was dim and quiet, full of monitors and sleeping children. Hannah looked impossibly small in the bed, her chest wrapped in bandages, tubes running from her arms and nose. But her face was peaceful, and the monitor showing her heart rate displayed a rhythm that was finally, blessedly regular. Jacob pulled a chair beside her bed and took her hand, careful not to disturb the IV. I'm here, baby. Right here. You did it. You're okay. She didn't wake for another 2 hours, but Jacob didn't move. Just sat there, holding her hand, watching her breathe, thanking every god he could name for the miracle of her survival. When her eyes finally fluttered open, confused and unfocused, Jacob leaned close. Hey, Hannah Banana. Welcome back. Daddy? Her voice was hoarse from the breathing tube. Did it work? It worked perfectly. Your heart's all fixed. You're going to be okay. A tear rolled down her cheek. I was scared. Me too, baby. Me too. But we made it. We're going to be okay. The ICU days were brutal in their own way. Constant monitoring, Hannah's pain that no amount of medication could completely erase, the setbacks and small victories that came with major surgery. But through it all, Jacob never left her side. He slept in the chair beside her bed, held her hand through the worst moments, celebrated every small milestone. On day 3, Hannah sat up and ate solid food for the first time. On day 5, she walked 10 steps with support. On day 7, she smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes, and told Jacob a knock-knock joke she'd learned from the nurse. Progress. Life. A future that had seemed impossible just days ago. Other families began stopping by Hannah's room. Parents of children in the cardiac unit who'd heard her story from the news coverage that had never really stopped. They brought small gifts and offered words of encouragement, and Jacob realized that his nightmare had somehow become inspiration for others fighting their own battles. A mother whose son was awaiting his second heart surgery told Jacob, "Seeing Hannah recover gives us hope. Thank you for sharing your journey." Jacob didn't know how to explain that he hadn't chosen to share anything, that the exposure had been forced upon him by leaked security footage and a hungry media machine. But looking at the hope in that mother's eyes, he realized that maybe some good had come from the chaos. Maybe his story, Hannah's story, mattered to people who needed to believe in miracles. Charlotte texted daily, never intrusive, just checking in. How is she today? And Thinking of you, and let me know if you need anything. Jacob answered when he could, their conversations brief but meaningful, a connection forged in crisis that felt increasingly essential to his survival. On day 9, Dr. Chen gave them the news they'd been praying for. Hannah could go home. Continue the medications exactly as prescribed, she instructed, handing Jacob a detailed care plan. Follow-up appointment in 2 weeks. No strenuous activity for at least a month. But honestly, Mr. Miles, she's healing beautifully. You should be very proud. Jacob looked at his daughter, propped up in bed reading a book that one of the nurses had brought, her color better than he'd seen in months, her breathing easy and unlabored. Proud didn't begin to cover what he felt. They left the hospital on a Wednesday afternoon, Hannah in a wheelchair per protocol. Though she insisted she could walk, Jacob carrying their belongings and more flowers than any hospital room should reasonably contain. News cameras waited outside, but hospital security held them back, creating a path to the taxi Jacob had called. As they pulled away from Northwestern Memorial, Hannah looked back at the building that had been their home for 10 days. I don't want to go back there. You won't have to, Jacob promised. Not unless it's just for checkups. You're done with hospitals, baby. Good. She settled against his side, tired but content. Can we go home? Home. Their tiny apartment with its creaky floors and secondhand furniture and walls, thin enough to hear the neighbors' every argument. It wasn't much, but it was theirs, and Hannah was alive to return to it. Yeah, baby, let's go home. That evening, after Hannah fell asleep in her own bed clutching her elephant, Jacob stood at their small kitchen window and looked out at the Chicago skyline. Somewhere in that sprawl of lights, Charlotte Wynne was probably in her penthouse, alone with the wreckage of her career and the knowledge that her kindness had saved a child's life, even if it destroyed her own. Jacob pulled out his phone and typed, Hannah came home today. She's doing great. I don't know how to thank you for what you did. You saved her life. You saved my life. If there's ever anything I can do for you, anything at all, please let me know. Charlotte's response took several minutes, as if she was choosing her words carefully. Seeing Hannah healthy is all the thanks I need. Take care of each other. That's what matters. Jacob wanted to say more, wanted to bridge the distance between their worlds and offer something meaningful in return for the gift she'd given him. But his daughter was calling from her bedroom, wanting water and another story, and the immediate needs of parenthood pushed everything else aside. Coming, Hannah Banana, he called, setting his phone down and heading toward her room. Behind him, unnoticed, a new text arrived from Charlotte. I've been thinking about starting a foundation for families facing medical crises they can't afford. The Hannah Miles Heart Fund. Would you be willing to help? Maybe share your story, help other kids who need what Hannah needed. The message sat unread for several hours while Jacob tended to his daughter, but when he finally saw it late that night, sitting in the dark of his living room with exhaustion and relief making his body feel foreign, Jacob felt something shift in his chest. Maybe this was how he could repay the debt. Not to Charlotte specifically, but to the universe that had given him back his daughter when it had already taken so much. By helping others, by turning his nightmare into hope for families still living theirs. Yes, he typed back simply. I'm in. Let's do it. Charlotte's response was immediate, despite the late hour. Thank you. Together we can make sure no parent has to choose between their child's life and financial ruin. Jacob set his phone aside and walked to Hannah's bedroom door, watching her sleep in the dim glow of her nightlight. Her chest rose and fell with a rhythm that would never stop being miraculous to him. Her face peaceful in a way it hadn't been for months. She'd lived. Despite 95% odds and his worst fears and a universe that seemed determined to take everyone he loved, Hannah had lived. Tomorrow, he would start thinking about foundations and fundraising and how to turn private tragedy into public good. Tomorrow, he would figure out how to navigate this strange new world where his face was recognizable and his story was currency. But tonight, he just stood in his daughter's doorway and breathed in sync with her, two hearts beating in grateful rhythm, alive against all the odds that mattered. The worst was over. The healing was just beginning. And somewhere across the city, Charlotte Wynne sat in her empty penthouse and allowed herself to believe, maybe for the first time in years, that doing good was possible even when it came at tremendous personal cost. That kindness mattered even when the world tried to twist it into something ugly. That maybe, just maybe, she'd finally become the person her father had always hoped she'd be. 3 months after Hannah came home from the hospital, Jacob sat in a conference room at the Chicago Community Foundation headquarters and realized his life had become something he no longer recognized. The table before him was mahogany, expensive in a way that made him acutely aware of his Walmart button-down and discount store khakis. Across from him sat Charlotte Wynne, dressed in a gray suit that probably cost more than his monthly rent, and between them lay the architectural plans for something neither of them could quite believe was real. "The Hannah Miles Heart Fund," Charlotte said, her finger tracing the blueprint spread across the table. "We've secured matching donations from 3 major corporations. With the GoFundMe proceeds and private contributions, we're looking at an initial endowment of $2.3 million. Jacob's head spun with numbers that seemed fictional. 4 months ago, he'd been counting quarters to buy Hannah's school lunch. Now he was discussing millions of dollars designated to help families like his, families drowning in medical bills and impossible choices. "That's enough to help how many kids?" His voice came out rougher than intended. "Conservatively? 30 to 40 children in the first year, more as the fund grows." Charlotte looked up from the plans, and Jacob caught something in her expression, hope mixed with uncertainty, as if she still couldn't believe redemption was possible. "We'll cover what insurance won't. Surgery costs, recovery expenses, family support during treatment. Everything you went through, Jacob, no other family should have to face that alone." The words hung between them, heavy with shared history. They'd been meeting like this for weeks now, planning the foundation, but they still moved around each other with careful politeness, 2 people whose lives had become unexpectedly entangled trying to figure out what they meant to one another. "Have you heard from the board?" Jacob asked, knowing the question was complicated. Charlotte's smile was tight. "They've offered to reinstate me. Full CEO position, public apology, the works. Apparently the positive press from the foundation has made them reconsider their hasty decision to throw me under the bus. That's good, right? Is it?" She leaned back in her chair, and for the first time since Jacob had met her, Charlotte looked uncertain. "I watched those security cameras because my job consumed my life. I had nothing else, no friends, no family beyond some distant cousins I see at Christmas. Just work and more work, and the belief that building an empire was the same as building a life." She met his eyes directly. "Maybe losing everything was the best thing that could have happened to me." Jacob thought about the night he'd lost Rebecca, the months of drowning that had followed, the way tragedy had stripped him down to essentials and forced him to rebuild from nothing. "Sometimes we need to break before we can heal right," he said quietly. "Is that from the Bible?" "No, that's from my therapist. Well, the hospital therapist they assigned after Hannah's surgery." Jacob smiled slightly. "Turns out watching your kid almost die gives you some things to work through." Charlotte's expression softened. "How is Hannah? Really?" "Running me ragged. Doctor says her heart's healing perfectly, but apparently fixing the physical part just unleashed all the energy she couldn't use before. She's in soccer now. Soccer, Charlotte. The kid who got winded walking upstairs 2 months ago is playing competitive sports." "That's wonderful. It's exhausting." But Jacob's smile was genuine, the kind that came from gratitude so deep it had no bottom. "Best kind of exhausting there is." They worked through the afternoon, hammering out details about the foundation's structure, the application process for families seeking help, the medical advisory board they'd need to assemble. Charlotte had thrown herself into the project with the same intensity she'd once reserved for quarterly earnings reports, and Jacob found himself matching her energy, discovering that he had a talent for this kind of work, connecting with desperate families, understanding their needs, translating suffering into actionable solutions. Around 4 o'clock, Charlotte's phone buzzed. She glanced at it and sighed. "The Tribune wants to do a profile piece. Chicago's Ice Queen melts, the redemption story." Their words, not mine. "Are you going to do it?" "I don't know. Part of me thinks we should just let the foundation speak for itself, but our PR consultant says public goodwill translates to donations, and donations translate to kids who get the surgeries they need." She rubbed her temples. "I hate that I have to think strategically about something that should just be about helping people." Jacob understood that tension, the collision between genuine compassion and the machinery required to make compassion effective at scale. Do the interview, he said. Tell your story. People need to know you're not some villain who was spying on employees. You were just someone trying to do good who made mistakes along the way. Were they mistakes? Charlotte's voice was soft. I watched you on those cameras, yes, but I saw something I needed to see. A reminder that goodness exists. That people can choose kindness even when the world gives them every reason not to. Was that wrong? I don't know, Jacob admitted. A couple months ago, I would have said yes. Felt like my privacy was violated, like I was someone's pet project. But now? He gestured at the foundation plan spread before them. Now I think maybe you saw something that needed to be seen. Maybe I needed someone to see me. Maybe we all do. The confession hung in the air between them, intimate in a way that made Charlotte look away quickly, professional armor sliding back into place. But not before Jacob caught a glimpse of something vulnerable beneath her polished exterior. Loneliness that matched his own. The ache of someone who'd built walls so high they'd forgotten what connection felt like. His phone rang, shattering the moment. Hannah's school. Mr. Miles, this is Principal Brennan. Nothing's wrong, the principal added quickly, hearing Jacob's sharp intake of breath. But Hannah got into an altercation on the playground. We need you to come in. 20 minutes later, Jacob sat in the principal's office with Hannah beside him, her arms crossed, and her expression mutinous. Across from them sat another parent and her son, a fifth grader whose lip was bleeding slightly. She hit me, the boy, Marcus, complained. For no reason. You said my daddy was famous for being poor. Hannah shot back, her voice cracking. You said he was pathetic. Jacob's heart clenched. This was what he'd feared, that the media attention would follow Hannah to school, would make her childhood about his story instead of her own life. Hannah, Principal Brennan said gently, we don't hit people, no matter what they say. But he was being mean about my daddy. Marcus's mother jumped in. My son was just stating facts. It's all over the news. Your father cleaning toilets, living in poverty, needing charity. If you can't handle people discussing public information. Ma'am, Jacob's voice was quiet but firm enough to stop her mid-sentence. Your son wasn't discussing public information. He was bullying my daughter about circumstances she didn't choose. There's a difference. Well, maybe if you'd kept your personal business private instead of turning it into a media circus. I didn't turn anything into a circus. Jacob felt his temper rising but forced it down. Someone leaked security footage without my knowledge or consent. My daughter almost died, and somehow that became entertainment for people like you to judge and gossip about. So forgive me if I don't appreciate your son using my lowest moment to make my kid feel bad about herself. Principal Brennan intervened before the confrontation could escalate. Both children will receive consequences appropriate to their actions. Marcus, 3 days of lunch detention for bullying. Hannah, 1 day for physical retaliation. And I'd suggest both families discuss appropriate ways to handle conflict. After Marcus and his mother left, Hannah buried her face in Jacob's shoulder and cried. I'm sorry I hit him, Daddy, but he was saying mean things about you and I got so mad. I know, baby, and I appreciate you defending me, but we can't use our fists to solve problems, okay? Even when people are cruel. It's not fair. Why do people care so much about our business? Jacob had asked himself the same question 1,000 times. Because people like stories. They like feeling connected to something real. But that doesn't make it okay for them to forget we're actual human beings with feelings and privacy. He drove Hannah home in the beat-up Honda he'd finally managed to buy with a small portion of the GoFundMe money, her quiet sniffles from the back seat breaking his heart. This was the cost of their reluctant fame. His daughter couldn't even go to school without his past becoming her present burden. That evening, after Hannah went to bed, Jacob called Charlotte. He'd been doing that more often lately, these late-night conversations that felt both necessary and dangerous, crossing some invisible line from professional collaboration to personal connection. Hannah got in a fight today, he said without preamble. Is she okay? Physically, yeah. Emotionally? Jacob sighed. A kid was making fun of me, calling me pathetic for being poor. She punched him. Charlotte was quiet for a moment. I'm sorry. This is my fault. If the footage had never leaked... Don't, Jacob cut her off. We can't keep relitigating the past. What's done is done. But Charlotte, I need to know, is this foundation just about easing your guilt? Because if it is, I need to know now before we get deeper into this. No. Her response was immediate and fierce. It was born from guilt, I'll admit that, but it's become something more. It's become the first truly meaningful thing I've done in years, maybe ever. A pause, then more softly. And working with you has reminded me what it feels like to actually care about something beyond profit margins and board approval. Jacob closed his eyes, feeling the weight of unspoken things pressing between them through the phone line. We're from different worlds, Charlotte. You know that, right? I know. I'm a warehouse mechanic with an 8th grade education and a daughter who needs me more than anything. You're a CEO who builds empires before breakfast. Former CEO, she corrected, who's seriously considering not going back. That shocked him. What? The board wants me back because the publicity is good, not because they believe I did the right thing, not because they value compassion or human decency, just because having me as the face of the Hannah Miles Heart Fund makes their stock price go up. Charlotte's voice was tired. I'm done working for people who only value goodness when it's profitable. So what will you do? I don't know. Run the foundation full-time, maybe? Actually use my business skills for something that matters. She laughed without humor. My father would be so proud. Took me 20 years to figure out what he knew all along, that a life spent helping people is worth more than all the corporate success in the world. Jacob thought about his own father, a construction worker who'd died too young from a heart attack at 49. Thought about legacy and meaning and what they were building together. Your father would be proud, he said quietly. I'm proud of you. The confession hung in the air, both too much and not enough. Thank you, Charlotte whispered. That means more than you know. They talked for another hour, conversation meandering through territory both safer and more vulnerable. Hannah's recovery, Charlotte's fraught relationship with her board, the family's already reaching out for help from the foundation. It felt natural, this connection growing between them, but also terrifying for its potential to complicate everything they were trying to build. Finally, exhaustion forced them toward goodbye. Jacob? Charlotte's voice was soft. What you said earlier about needing someone to see you, I need you to know. I see you. Not the janitor, not the media story, not the symbol. Just you. The man who gives away his coat to strangers and fixes things nobody asks him to fix and loves his daughter fierce enough to move mountains. I see you. Jacob's throat tightened. I see you too, Charlotte. The woman who watched security cameras looking for something she'd lost, who was brave enough to reach out even when it cost her everything. I see you. After they hung up, Jacob sat in his dark living room and admitted a truth he'd been avoiding for weeks. He was falling for Charlotte Wynne. Not because she'd saved his daughter, though he'd be forever grateful for that, but because beneath her CEO armor was someone as lonely and determined and broken as he was. Someone trying to build meaning from wreckage. Someone who understood loss and chose kindness anyway. It was too soon, too complicated, too everything. But his heart, battered as it was, had apparently decided it was also inevitable. The weeks that followed brought momentum that felt like magic. The Hannah Miles Heart Fund officially launched at a press conference where Jacob and Charlotte stood side by side, fielding questions about their journey from security footage to foundation. The story of their unlikely partnership, the janitor and the CEO, brought together by compassion and camera surveillance, captured the public imagination in a way neither of them had anticipated. Donations poured in. Major hospitals signed on as partners. The medical advisory board came together with remarkable speed, doctors and surgeons volunteering their expertise to help determine which families most needed support. By early spring, just 5 months after Hannah's surgery, the foundation had helped 12 children receive life-saving cardiac operations their families couldn't otherwise afford. 12 children alive, because Charlotte had watched security cameras one night and decided kindness mattered. Jacob met each family personally, sitting in waiting rooms while their children were in surgery, offering the kind of presence Eleanor Foster had given him. He became the foundation's heart, the person who understood viscerally what these parents were experiencing, who could say, I know, and have it mean something true. Charlotte handled the business side with the same intensity she'd once directed toward corporate growth. She negotiated with hospitals for reduced rates, courted donors with practiced charm, built systems to ensure every dollar was used effectively. Together, they were formidable, his compassion and her competence creating something neither could have built alone. They were also, increasingly obviously, falling in love. It happened in small moments. Charlotte bringing coffee to late-night planning sessions and remembering exactly how Jacob took it. Jacob making Charlotte laugh with stories about Hannah's latest adventures, coaxing genuine joy from someone who'd forgotten how. The way their hands would brush, reaching for the same document, the lingering eye contact that stretched past professional into something warmer, the late-night phone calls that had nothing to do with foundation business and everything to do with not wanting to hang up. Pastor Marcus noticed during one of their foundation meetings at the church, "You two realize everyone can see it, right?" "See what?" Jacob asked, though he knew exactly what. "The way you look at each other, like you're both trying real hard not to notice you've already fallen." The pastor smiled. "Ain't no shame in it, Jacob. Your heart's allowed to heal, allowed to make room for someone new. Rebecca's only been gone 2 years. And she'd be the first one telling you to live, son. She wouldn't want you spending the rest of your life alone, punishing yourself for surviving." Marcus gripped his shoulder. "That woman cares about you. And unless I'm completely blind, you care about her too. So maybe stop fighting it and see where it goes." But Jacob was terrified of where it might go, terrified of betraying Rebecca's memory, terrified that his feelings for Charlotte were tangled up with gratitude and trauma and couldn't be trusted, terrified that Hannah would hate him for letting someone new into their carefully constructed world of two. He should have known his daughter was smarter than his fears. "Daddy?" Hannah asked one evening while they were making dinner together, her new favorite activity since the surgery had given her energy to burn. "Do you like Miss Charlotte?" Jacob nearly dropped the pot he was holding. "What makes you ask that?" "You smile different when you talk about her, like how you used to smile in the pictures with Mommy." Hannah looked up at him with those too perceptive eyes. "It's okay if you do. I like her too. She saved my life." "We both like her," Jacob agreed carefully. "But it's complicated, baby." "Why?" "How did you explain to a 7-year-old that love felt like betrayal when it arrived too soon? That moving forward felt like leaving someone behind?" "Because Mommy was special. Is special. And I don't want you to think that caring about someone new means we love Mommy less." Hannah considered this with her usual seriousness. "At school, Mrs. Patterson said her first husband died. Then she married Mr. Patterson. But she has pictures of both husbands in her house because you can love people who are gone and people who are here at the same time." She stirred the pasta with careful attention. "Hearts are big, Daddy. There's room for lots of people." Out of the mouths of babes, Jacob pulled Hannah into a hug, overwhelmed by her wisdom and generosity. "When did you get so smart?" "I was always smart. You just didn't notice because you were sad." She was right. He had been sad, drowning in grief for so long that he'd forgotten how to imagine anything else. But lately, especially when he was with Charlotte, Jacob found himself experiencing something that felt suspiciously like happiness, not the desperate clinging by fingernails survival that had characterized the last 2 years, but actual joy. Laughter that came easily, hope that didn't require constant effort to maintain. Maybe it was time to stop fighting it. He called Charlotte that night after Hannah went to bed. "What are you doing Saturday?" Probably foundation paperwork. Why?" "Hannah wants to go to the Science Museum, the one she was supposed to visit on that field trip before—" He didn't finish the sentence. "Before she collapsed, before the surgery, before their lives changed forever. Anyway, she asked if you'd come with us, if you want to." The pause on the other end was long enough that Jacob started to regret asking. But then Charlotte said, her voice soft, "I'd love to. Really. Thank you for inviting me." Saturday arrived with the kind of spring sunshine that made Chicago almost beautiful. Jacob picked Charlotte up in his Honda, and she appeared in jeans and a simple sweater, her hair down for the first time since he'd met her. She looked younger, less armored, and Jacob felt something shift in his chest at the sight of her. Hannah chattered from the back seat the entire drive, telling Charlotte everything she'd learned about dolphins and space and the human heart. "Did you know your heart beats 100,000 times a day? That's 35 million times a year. Mine's going to beat for at least 80 more years now that it's fixed." That's a lot of heartbeats, Charlotte agreed, smiling. It's enough for a whole long life. I'm going to use all of them doing important things, like helping other kids who are sick. Daddy says we can volunteer at the foundation when I'm older. They spent the day exploring exhibits, Hannah dragging them from display to display with inexhaustible energy. Jacob watched Charlotte crouch down to Hannah's level to read information placards, watched her genuine delight in his daughter's enthusiasm, watched her slowly relax into something unguarded and real. At the butterfly exhibit, Hannah ran ahead to look at the chrysalises, leaving Jacob and Charlotte standing together in a room full of fluttering wings and dappled sunlight. "Thank you for today," Charlotte said quietly. "I can't remember the last time I just lived without thinking about mergers or board meetings or quarterly projections. Thanks for coming. Hannah's been asking about you every day this week. I think she's adopted you as her bonus adult." Charlotte smiled, but her eyes were shining with unshed tears. "I never thought I'd have this. A kid who wanted me around, a family that felt like home. I thought I'd sacrificed that possibility years ago when I chose my career over everything else." Jacob took a breath, gathering courage. "Charlotte, I need to tell you something." "That sounds ominous." "No, it's just—" He struggled for words. "These last few months, working with you, talking to you, watching you transform from the ice queen everyone feared into someone who laughs at bad puns and cries during Disney movies. You said you wouldn't tell anyone about the Disney movies. I've realized something. I'm falling in love with you." The confession tumbled out, graceless but true. "And I know it's complicated and probably too soon, and maybe tangled up with everything we've been through. But I needed you to know. I see you, Charlotte Wynn. Not the CEO, not the headlines, not the woman who made mistakes. I see the person who watched security cameras looking for goodness and decided to create it herself. And that person? She's extraordinary." Charlotte's tears spilled over, tracking down her cheeks in the butterfly-filtered light. "I'm falling in love with you too. Have been for weeks, maybe longer. But I was too scared to say it, too worried I'd ruin what we were building. So what do we do now? We be honest. We take it slow. We figure it out together." She reached for his hand, their fingers intertwining with the naturalness of inevitability. "And we remember that hearts are big enough for lots of people. Your daughter taught me that." Hannah came running back, breathless and glowing. "Daddy! Miss Charlotte! They have a butterfly that looks like an owl. Come see." She grabbed both their hands, pulling them toward the next exhibit, and Jacob felt the last piece of his broken heart click into place. This, Hannah between them, Charlotte's hand in his, laughter and butterflies and spring sunshine, this was what healing looked like. Not forgetting the past, but making room for the future. Not replacing what was lost, but building something new from the pieces that remained. 6 months later, on a crisp October evening, the Miles Community Center held its grand opening. The building stood in the South Side neighborhood where Jacob had grown up, a gleaming structure of glass and brick that had once been an abandoned warehouse. Now it was home to the Hannah Miles Heart Fund's main office, a community health clinic offering free cardiac screenings, support groups for families facing medical crises, and after-school programs for neighborhood kids. Jacob stood at the podium, looking out at a crowd of hundreds, foundation donors and board members, families they'd helped, reporters and community leaders, and ordinary people who'd followed their story and wanted to witness this moment. Hannah sat in the front row between Charlotte and Pastor Marcus, wearing a dress she'd picked out herself and a smile that hadn't dimmed in weeks. Her scar was visible above the neckline. She refused to hide it, said it was proof that broken things could be fixed and made even stronger. 18 months ago, Jacob began, his voice carrying across the crowd, I was a janitor working the night shift, trying to keep my daughter and myself alive one day at a time. I never imagined I'd end up here, speaking at the opening of a community center built on the principle that everyone deserves help when they need it most. He paused, gathering his thoughts. Public speaking still terrified him, but this mattered too much to let fear win. My journey to this moment started with small acts of kindness nobody was supposed to see, giving my coat to a homeless veteran, fixing broken lights, helping people just because it needed doing. I didn't do those things for recognition. I did them because my wife taught me that kindness matters, even when nobody's watching. His voice cracked slightly. Especially when nobody's watching. The crowd was silent, attentive. But someone was watching. Charlotte Wynne saw those security camera feeds and decided she wanted to help. And her help, complicated and imperfect as it was, saved my daughter's life. Saved my life. Started a chain reaction that's now helped over 60 children receive the cardiac surgeries they desperately needed. Jacob looked directly at Charlotte, who was trying and failing not to cry. So I guess the moral of this story is that kindness creates ripples we can't predict. That being seen, really seen in our struggles and our goodness, matters more than we know. And that sometimes broken things can be repaired in ways that make them more beautiful than they were before. He gestured to Hannah. My daughter's heart was broken, and doctors fixed it. My heart was broken, and time and love and community fixed it. This whole building represents something broken being transformed into something that heals others. That's what I hope the Miles Community Center becomes, a place where broken people and broken systems can find repair. The applause was thunderous. Hannah ran up to the podium and threw her arms around Jacob's waist, and the photographers' cameras went crazy capturing the moment. Then Charlotte joined them on stage, and together the three of them cut the ribbon stretched across the center's entrance. Inside, the walls were covered with photos of the children they'd helped. 60 smiling faces, 60 lives saved, 60 families given hope when they had none left. Jacob moved through the gallery with Charlotte's hand in his, reading the stories, remembering the waiting rooms and the surgeries and the prayers answered. A reporter approached with her camera crew. Mr. Miles, can we get a few words for the evening news? Jacob had learned to navigate these requests to protect his privacy while honoring the platform he'd been given. Sure, but keep it quick. I've got a daughter who wants to explore every corner of this building. Looking back at everything that's happened, the leaked footage, the media storm, building this foundation, do you have any regrets? Jacob considered the question. Did he regret the violation of privacy? The way strangers felt entitled to judge his lowest moments? The price Hannah had paid in playground bullying and lost anonymity? Yes, absolutely. But would he trade the outcome? The 60 children alive because his story had inspired action? The community center that would serve thousands? The love he'd found with Charlotte after years of grief? Regrets and gratitude can coexist, he said finally. I wish my family's privacy had been respected, but I'm grateful for everything that came from the chaos. I guess that's life, messy and complicated and painful and beautiful all at once. You take the good with the bad and try to create meaning from both. That evening, after the crowds dispersed and the center closed, Jacob stood on the front steps with Charlotte and Hannah, looking up at the building's sign illuminated against the darkening sky. Miles Community Center, because kindness matters. Mommy would have liked this, Hannah said softly. Yeah, baby, she would have loved it. Jacob pulled his daughter close. She would have loved that you're healthy and strong, would have loved that we're helping other kids, would have loved... He glanced at Charlotte, who smiled through tears. She would have loved everything about who we've become. Charlotte wrapped her arms around both of them, and they stood there as a family, unconventional and hard-won, forged in crisis and cemented by choice. The security camera above the entrance blinked its steady red light, recording this moment for whatever future needed proof that broken people could heal, that kindness mattered even in a world that often punished it, that love was possible even after devastating loss. One camera had started everything, caught Jacob's small acts of goodness, and set in motion the chain of events that destroyed and rebuilt their lives. Now another camera bore witness to what they'd created from the rubble. A family, a foundation, a future brighter than either of them had dared to imagine. Hannah yawned and leaned against Jacob's shoulder. Can we go home now? I'm tired. Yeah, sweetheart. Let's go home. Home was different now than it had been 18 months ago. They'd moved into a modest house in a better neighborhood, nothing extravagant, but enough space for Hannah to have her own room and Jacob to have a workshop for his weekend projects. Charlotte spent more nights there than in her penthouse, cooking dinners and helping with homework, and slowly learning to be part of a family after years of deliberate isolation. They'd announced their relationship 6 weeks ago, and the media had predictably exploded with opinions, some calling it beautiful, others questioning the power dynamics, everyone feeling entitled to judge. But Jacob and Charlotte had learned to tune out the noise, to build their lives on foundation more solid than public opinion. As they drove home through Chicago's glowing streets, Hannah chattering from the back seat about the center and all the kids they'd help, Jacob caught Charlotte's eye and smiled. She smiled back, reaching across the console to take his hand. No words needed. Just gratitude and love and the quiet understanding that they'd found something neither had been looking for but both desperately needed. That night, after Hannah fell asleep with her elephant clutched tight, Jacob and Charlotte sat on the back porch watching stars emerge from the city light pollution. She leaned against his shoulder, comfortable in the silence they'd learned to share. "Do you think we would have found each other if none of this had happened?" Charlotte asked. "If I hadn't watched those cameras, if the footage had never leaked?" Jacob considered. "Honestly, probably not. Our worlds were too far apart. I would have stayed invisible, and you would have stayed untouchable. So maybe it all happened the way it needed to. Maybe. Or maybe we just got lucky that something broken could be fixed, that someone cared enough to try." Charlotte turned to face him, her expression serious. "Jacob Miles, you are the best thing that ever happened to me. You and Hannah. This life we're building. I'd go through it all again, the humiliation, the board fight, losing my position, if it meant ending up right here with you." "Even the Ice Queen nickname," she laughed. "Even that, though I prefer the new nickname, Chicago's kindest CEO." "Former CEO." "Former kindest CEO," Charlotte corrected with a smile. "Current full-time philanthropist and part-time stepmother, if you'll have me in that role." Jacob's heart skipped. They hadn't talked explicitly about marriage, about making official what had become undeniable, but hearing Charlotte claim that title, stepmother, felt right in a way that made his eyes sting. "Hannah would be thrilled. She's been asking if you can come to parent-teacher conferences." "Then it's settled." Charlotte kissed him softly. "We're a family, unconventional and pieced together from broken parts, but a family nonetheless." Inside the house, a small voice called out, "Daddy, I had a bad dream." Jacob stood, but Charlotte grabbed his hand. "I'll go. You stay here." He watched through the window as Charlotte climbed the stairs to Hannah's room, heard the murmur of comfort and reassurance, saw the nightlight's glow illuminate two figures curled together. His daughter and the woman he loved, creating their own bond independent of him. His phone buzzed with a text from Pastor Marcus. "Saw the news coverage. Your wife would be so proud of you, son. You took your pain and turned it into purpose. That's redemption." Jacob typed back, "Learned from the best. Thank you for everything, Pastor." The response came immediately. "Thank him. I'm just the messenger. But you're welcome. Now go kiss that woman and count your blessings. Sound advice." Jacob went inside and found Charlotte coming down the stairs, a soft smile on her face. "She's asleep. Just needed to know someone was there. Thank you for being here, for both of us. There's nowhere else I'd rather be." Charlotte took his hand, leading him to the couch where they settled together, her head on his chest, his arm around her shoulders. "This is what I was looking for all those nights watching security cameras. Not you specifically, but this. The feeling of home, of mattering to someone, of building something that lasts beyond quarterly reports and stockholder meetings." "You found it," Jacob murmured into her hair. "We both did." They fell asleep like that, tangled together on the couch like teenagers, exhausted from the day but content in a way that felt earned. Upstairs, Hannah slept peacefully, her repaired heart beating strong and steady, her dreams uncomplicated by fear or pain. And on the south side, the Miles Community Center stood sentinel through the night, its lights glowing in the darkness, a beacon of hope for everyone who'd forgotten that kindness mattered, that help was possible, that broken things could heal if someone cared enough to try. The security cameras throughout the building recorded empty hallways and quiet offices, but they also captured something essential, proof that compassion could triumph over circumstance, that love could emerge from crisis, that ordinary people doing extraordinary things could change the world one small act at a time. Jacob's journey had started with a coat given to a shivering veteran and a security camera that captured one man's quiet goodness. It had nearly ended with his daughter's death and a CEO's professional execution. But it had transformed into something neither of them could have imagined, a foundation helping hundreds, a family built from wreckage, A love story that proved broken hearts could heal stronger than before. Sometimes the cameras caught what mattered most. Sometimes being seen, truly seen, in all your struggle and sacrifice and stubborn goodness was exactly what you needed to survive. Sometimes kindness created ripples that traveled farther than you'd ever know. And sometimes, Jacob thought as he drifted toward sleep with Charlotte's steady breathing matching his own, sometimes the invisible man became visible not to be celebrated, but to be reminded that he was never as alone as he'd feared, that the universe, random and cruel as it could be, still had moments of grace. That love, in all its complicated, imperfect forms, was worth every risk. The night settled over Chicago, and the Miles family slept in peace, their story finally complete, their hearts finally home.